Okay, this time we're going to get started. So for those of you who know me, I usually pride myself on running a quick and efficient meeting, and by my count, we're a little late. So I apologize for that. A part of that went to the caucus that had run a little long so that we could elect some new members. But I'd like to just kind of dive in right now. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Dan Bruce. I'm the town moderator. So welcome to the 2017 Fall Annual Town Meeting. There being a quorum of over 76 members being present, we're going to finally come to order. Does the clerk attest to the return of the warrant? I do. Yes, she does. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I have a little special treat for myself here. I have a, Hallie Lasordo is going to be performing the national anthem for us. Hallie, please come up to the stage. Hallie's a junior at the high school, who I had the pleasure to coach when my Walpole youth soccer coaching days. A few years ago, when I learned during the soccer season that she was also a singer, it became a natural one for me to ask her to come forward here. Hallie's a member of the varsity soccer team who needs 2 more points to secure another tournament berth. So root for them, okay? Hallie is also involved in the TV production and the musical at the high school, so the stage is very familiar to her. Hallie?
Can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming in the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Thank you, Hallie. Thank you, Hallie. That was beautiful. So next I'd like to introduce a few of the people sitting to my left. Town Council, Alana Clark. Town Administrator, Jim Johnson, and Vice Chairman of the Board of Selectmen, Mark Gallivan. Eric is away on business and unable to be here tonight. We also have with us our esteemed colleague from the Congress, Congressman Lynch. Will you please come forward for a few comments here, please?
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Moderator, for your extreme courtesy. I do appreciate that. To all my colleagues in government here, members of the Board of Selectmen and town officials. I'm normally in Washington on Monday nights, so it It is a joy to be home, but also it's a great pleasure for me to be with you. And I'm very thankful for the opportunity to address you briefly here in town meeting. There is no shortage of issues in Washington, D.C. Lately, but rather than run the whole landscape of issues, I would like to just focus on one that we are grappling with because it came upon us somewhat urgently, and that is, let me first start. I recently was appointed to the conference committee on the Defense Authorization Bill. So what happens is the House and Senate have passed different versions of the Defense Authorization Bill, which funds our military and provides for the common defense as required in the Constitution. And a handful of us will actually try to figure out a way to reconcile the two bills and make sure that we have sufficient funding for our military. And so that will occur over the next week. We just approved the motion to go to conference on Friday, and so we will begin that probably the beginning of next week. And while we have to acknowledge the change in our profile in both Iraq and Afghanistan, at one point in Iraq we had 165,000 troops, in Afghanistan a little north of 100,000. Those numbers are way down, below 10,000 probably in each country, excluding contractors. But there's still other areas of the globe where we've been asked to come and provide some support, mostly in Eastern Europe, where Ukraine, other countries in that area, where there's a growing anxiety about recent changes in Russian military policy, as well as the South China Sea. So that will be debated within the conference committee, as I say, probably beginning next week. More urgently, however, this is the issue that really has, I think, caught Congress by surprise. The President has this week announced his intention to withdraw from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action that was entered into by the U.S., Germany, France, China, Russia, and entered into with Iran, which required the Iranians to cease nuclear weapons operations and development and actually disassemble certain components of its nuclear fuel production, and also to allow IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors and monitors to physically go into the facilities at Fordo, Natanz, Arak, where previously we knew from our intelligence that nuclear fuel production was ongoing. The President has now put it on Congress. He has said that Congress has to find a way to re-engineer this agreement. Otherwise, if they don't, the President will pull out. The problem that we have is that this is a multilateral agreement. This has been negotiated over 4.5 years. And my fears are threefold. One, I think that pulling out of the agreement will actually play into the hands of the hardliners in Iran who believe that having IAEA, international weapons inspectors on the ground in Iran is a violation of their sovereignty. So the hardliners there in Iran are very, very much against this agreement. Secondly, I think it undermines the more moderate, this is a relative term, the more moderate groups within Iran that actually supported signing the agreement. And thirdly, it jeopardizes our ability to have those weapons inspectors and nuclear scientists on the ground in Iran giving us regular reports about the activities within those facilities. I think we jeopardize that. And lastly, while that access was gained in exchange for dropping the economic sanctions against Iran, because technically Iran is still in compliance with that agreement, I doubt greatly that our longtime allies, Germany, France, Great Britain, will reinstitute those sanctions. Needless to say, I don't think China or Russia will consider reinstituting those sanctions while Iran is in full compliance with the testing and monitoring protocols. So that's a real concern. It has a real urgency because we're not exactly sure how much time we have to try to put something together. But I doubt very much that our international neighbors will want to reopen that agreement that is firmly in place and so far in compliance, at least according to our own inspectors. Let's see. Some housekeeping issues. I just wanted to let people know that Social Security has announced there will be a 2% increase for this coming year. Of course, everyone who's on Social Security realizes that there is usually a concomitant increase in Medicare premiums that comes after they give you a raise. They take a little bit back. So Medicare has not announced what the premium might be or if it's coming. So we have to stay tuned on that. Academy Day. Every year I conduct an Academy Day. This year it's being held at Braintree East Middle School. And at that Academy Day, any young person who wishes to attend a military academy, we have folks from West Point, Annapolis, Mass Maritime, U.S. Merchant Marine, Mass Maritime, Air Force Academy. They will come. We actually have some cadets and midshipmen coming back who formerly were high school kids here in Walpole and elsewhere to actually tell the kids about their experience, so it's a great opportunity. So that's this Sunday at 10 a.m. at East Middle School in Braintree, if anybody's interested. And of course, Walpole has had a long and strong tradition in sending young people to the military academies, and we're grateful for that. Let's see. Lastly, I want to say thank you to a few people. Number one, I noticed that there's a lot of activity up on the former Superfund site at the old mill that is being redone, and I want to thank a couple of people who got me involved very early on when that was a Superfund site and it was sort of a no-go zone. Lois Glasgow and also Robin Chappelle, who did great work. They dragged me up onto that site and showed me what the problems were, and then we had a series of meetings with the EPA. Doug Guttrow, who was then a sort of a regional administrator for the EPA, and others took good notice, and I give the EPA great credit on their focus on cleaning up that site. And now I understand that the new building for the Council on Aging is under construction, and also the new police station. So delighted to hear that has moved forward so quickly. And I know that there's great credit due to a lot of people, but again, Robin Chappelle and Lois Glasgow, thank you for getting me involved in that. I want to also thank and congratulate Chief Tim Bailey on the fire grant, a federal fire grant that we were just successful on. Tim wrote he probably had some lieutenant write the grant, but we worked with Tim. He did a great job. He got $92,000 for the town of Walpole, which will be used for what they call Mayday emergency equipment. That is a case where if you have a firefighter trapped and you have to go in and recover your own firefighter. This was a big issue in that huge cold storage fire out in Worcester, where we lost 6 firefighters, where one after another they went in to rescue the firefighter who went in before, and there was no way to track them, and we lost 6 firefighters. Well, this is equipment that would help in that situation. And I think, I just want to say, Chief Bailey deserves great credit on being successful on that grant. Secondly, John Carmichael, our police chief, showed extreme wisdom in hiring a young soldier away from my office, John Murphy, who was I met in Afghanistan. He came back to the U.S., was looking for work, ended up working in my office. and lived in Walpole, and now is serving as a Walpole police officer, and I'm sure he's much better paid with the police force than he was at my office. And lastly, Steve Fortin, who's here tonight, who was the former principal at the Old Post Road School. I'm not sure if you know this, but the Old Post Road School won a Blue Ribbon Award from the United States Department of Education. And these are highly, highly competitive awards that were well-deserved, and I just want to thank Steve for his great work, the work of the teachers at the Old Post Road School, and also the students as well for being recognized for extreme excellence in academic achievement. So thank you very much. I think that the moderator might have... Let me just...
Go ahead, Congressman.
In closing, I just want to say, it's an honor for me. It's an honor for me every day to represent Walpole in the United States Congress. It really is. You're a wonderful reflection of what's best about America. You take care of your kids, you take care of your seniors, you take care of your veterans. You're very active in your community. It is an honor every day for me to represent you, and I work every day to try to meet your highest expectations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Congressman Lynch. As the Congressman was alluding to at the end of his remarks there, Steve Fortin is here with us this evening. Steve, would you please come down front, please? So Steve retired at the end of the 2016-2017 school year after, was it 37 years? 27. 27. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to. It seemed like 37, right?
Some days. Some days.
So again, Steve's here to represent the teaching staff. I understand that he was instrumental in bringing forward the application for the grant and award. I just like to quote from the press release: the National Blue Schools program honors public and private elementary, middle, and high schools where students achieve very high learning standards or are making notable improvements in the closing achievement gap. Old Post Road was the only Massachusetts school in the exemplary high-performing school category. There were 3 elementary schools recognized in Massachusetts. So that's quite an accomplishment. This coveted award, as the Congressman alluded to, affirms the hard work of the educators, the administration, and the community in creating an environment where our schools are successful and our students can move on and in their dreams and their aspirations and going forward. So we give them a great start at the elementary school level. Obviously, this can't be done without the support of the school committee, the superintendent and his staff. Dr. Gene Kenny, I'd like to call out, I know who does a lot with the curriculum. I think it's admirable. Steve, I think you have a few comments for us as well, too, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Moderator. It's great to be back in Walpole tonight. Retirement is great, but I certainly miss the students and the teachers and everyone here in Walpole. This is a great town to grow up in. It's a pleasure. I'm so honored to be a part of this National Blue Ribbon Award for the school. I'm a little cog there. People have asked me, what's the secret? And I think the secret is hard work, strong efforts from the students each and every day, a caring staff who goes above and beyond, who gives 100% every day. And I've always said that you've got to love to come to your job each and every day. The student's job is learning, the teacher's job is teaching. As the town moderator mentioned, school committee has been wonderful. Parents have been super in preparing their students for school and getting them ready and taking school to the 24th hour. School doesn't end at 2:45 or 3:15. It continues, and our parents do a great job of educating them also. Townspeople, you've provided great resources for us. We were so terribly pleased with the budgets that we've had in the last couple of years to really go above and beyond what we thought we could. It's a pleasure. It was a pleasure to work for the 27 years that I was here. The curriculum is an extremely strong one. One of the things that I wanted to mention is that for about 2 years, we were able to employ a math consultant to work with all of the teachers here. And it was because of the budget that you provided us with. This math consultant taught the teachers, who then taught the children, how to think about outside the box, and finding that there were more than one way to solve a problem. You might go about it in 3 or 4 different ways, but the flexibility that she taught and is being taught in the classrooms, that flexibility carries on to everything, not only math, but language arts, reading, and kids are thinking more and more flexibly every day and more critically. The resources of technology in this town have come so far, and that's part of one of the reasons why I think we've received this National Blue Ribbon Award. This award could go to any school in this town because all of our schools are schools of excellence, and it was great to work here for 27 years. I miss it every day. In the morning I get up, and the first thing I think of is what's happening at school, and I think it really shows that this is a caring community, a community that really puts a lot of emphasis into education. And I think that we start a great foundation in the elementary level that spreads to 2 wonderful middle schools and then to a great senior high school. So I know I'm going to hear great things about Old Post Road and about Walpole Public Schools for years to come. It is a great place to grow up in and for kids to grow and learn each and every day. So thank you so much for allowing me to say a couple words tonight. And we look forward to receiving that award in Washington in November. And we'll bring back a nice flag and a nice award that we can show everybody, and everyone in town can be very proud of that. So thank you very much for allowing me to speak tonight.
A couple of more housekeeping matters, and I want to actually make some thank yous to some folks that town meeting doesn't happen without their efforts. There's many of them. First, thanks to the League of Women Voters for staffing the door and coordinating the sign-in. Thank you to the town clerk and her staff, who I'm going to call out by name because I don't think they always get the recognition they deserve, but Laura Bamford, Darlene Leonard, and Sharon Stedman. They all put a lot of time and effort into preparing for this evening's town meeting. I also want to thank the custodial staff here at the high school. Thank you to Walpole Media Corp., including Pete, Luke, and Jeff, for televising the meeting. There's a lot of setup and testing that goes into that whole production. And I also have a special announcement here, too, from the Walpole Media Corp., in that they would like our viewers to know that this fall town meeting is available tonight on YouTube as a live stream. This is a test live stream, but simply go to youtube.com and search Walpole Media TV and then click videos, and you'll be able to view the live stream. You can also go, as you know, with YouTube and view it at other times. So this is a great step forward in making town meeting available to folks when they want to watch it. There's also another quick announcement to the Attorney General Maura Healey will hold a town hall meeting here at the Walpole High School Auditorium next Monday evening, October 23rd, beginning at 6:30 p.m. The Attorney General will outline what she and her office is working on for Massachusetts, and will be ready to answer questions from those in attendance. So folks, we got to get this done in 2 nights so we don't actually have to fight over the space. But in all seriousness, if per chance we went on, and I hate to jinx it, we'll meet on Wednesday next, not Monday next, because we don't have a venue, and I didn't think it was worthwhile spending the dollars to go set up Johnson Middle School as an alternative place. So we can get it done, though. I know we can. I'd also like to thank Claire Abril and Cindy Berube for all the work they do here to prepare for this evening. And of course, thanks to Jim Diatilio, the technical support back there in the production booth. We have a number of new members this evening. I'm not sure what the total is. It's actually 25 new members, 21 that were elected and then 4 from caucus this evening. Since we're a little behind schedule, I'm going to ask you all to stand and please be recognized rather than read off the list of names. So all new members, please stand. Come on, there's 25 of you. There you go. Thank you. We have one other little housekeeping matter here that the town clerk needs to take care of. There seems to be a handful of folks, a dozen?
No, there's 5 altogether.
5? So 5 members that have not yet taken their oath, so we're going to call your name. You're going to stand and take your oath right here with us. So maybe this will keep you from doing this. Yeah. Go ahead.
So it's Darren Hassenjager, Jillian Morley, Peter Drogan, Christy Masajewski. That's it. 2. So who do we
Is that it? Just one?
That's it. And
Okay.
Fiona Murphy. Okay, just Darren.
All right, we'll have to remember that. So it's just Darren?
Yeah.
Right? Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. Do you, Darren Hassenjager, solemnly swear that you will faithfully and impartially discharge the duties incumbent upon you as a representative town meeting member in Precinct 1, according to the bylaws of the town of Walpole and the laws of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, so help you God? Thank you. Okay, we're good.
All right, thank you. So we have 4 or 5. We'll have to check on Wednesday, right?
Wednesday.
Okay, some procedural rules here we just need to go over. Please note, if you're an RTM member, and Darren, I can't quite tell where you are, but a town official member or please sit on this side of the break. All other visitors, if you're not an RTM, need to sit on the other side of the break. So if you're not an RTM, you need to move past that break there. And if you are, you need to come forward and grab a seat. Thank you. That's just to help me when we vote and the tellers when we do a standing vote and so forth. If you would like to speak, please come to the microphones located down front at the beginning of the aisles. When you are recognized to speak, please identify yourself by name and precinct each time, even if I call you by name. Okay, we need to make sure we get a proper record, and please don't assume. Address your remarks to the moderator. That's me. If you are asking a question, I will ask the appropriate official for a response. Custom requires you do not get in a direct dialogue with the answering official. Let's try to adhere to that tonight. If you use facts and figures when speaking, please reference the source. If the source is a document, please have copies available to the other members. I propose limiting time to speak for the primary sponsors to 5 minutes and all other subsequent speakers to 3 minutes in order to facilitate an orderly and efficient meeting. I will make every effort to recognize any RTM wishing to speak on an article or motion for the first time over those who have previously spoken to the issue. So if you are in line, again, and notice there's individuals behind you queuing up, please be aware that if there's someone behind you that hasn't spoken, I will bypass you and go to that other person. This is clearly in our rules, and I want to make sure everybody has an opportunity to speak at least once on a matter. The podium is to be used by town officials, town committee members, and other ex officio members whose duties have a relevance to the motion. The RTM members shall speak from the aisle microphones. When debate on a particular article is complete, I will take a vote. Voting is usually by voice, as you know, aye or no. When it's too close for me to declare, we will take a standing vote, and as you all know, there are rules for that. We need 6 tellers. I need 2 from the my left, your right, and 2 from the center, and 2 from the right. On the left, sir?
John Provine,
Thanks, John. We have another over there? On my left, I need another teller.
Really? These are so.
You're gonna move your seat, John? You're gonna do the center one, right?
Yeah.
All right, John, I'll take you in the center, but I need another in the left. Preferably somebody sitting. Yes, sir. Thank you, Paul. Someone else in the center? Thanks, Mark. Mark Trudell. And to my right. Thank you, Mr. Buckley. Someone else? All right, don't be shy.
Yeah, there's so many.
Thank you, Susan. If there is a standing vote, I will first count the teller's vote by show of hands. The tellers will then count the standing vote. The ayes first and then the noes. Tellers shall coordinate their counts and then announce from the microphone. Not to me, do not shout it out where you are. Queue up at the microphones and announce it from the microphones so that we all hear it at the same time. The town clerk and I will independently tally all the votes to determine whether the quantum of vote has been met. As many of you have done already, if you wish to make a substitute motion and know in advance you are going to do so, please prepare the motion in writing, have it seconded, and bring it down front to the town clerk. Ensure it's signed by both parties. This allows the town clerk to keep an accurate record of the proceedings. We may see some spirited debate. Actually, we will see some spirited debate tonight, I know, over a number of issues. I expect the debate to remain respectful at all times. Please limit your debate to information that will allow fellow RTM members to decide how to vote on the motion immediately before them. Declare your position and your reasons for wanting the members to support your position. Keep in mind that your right to speak is balanced by the right of your fellow RTM members as a whole to listen only to what is pertinent to the question under consideration. That's a long list. Does anyone have any objections to anything I've stated?
How adjustable will it be to the timeline?
How would I suggest we start with the 5 and the 3, and if you know or think you're going to need dispensation, you can ask for it as it is in our rules. Thank you. Okay, so let me show that no one objected, and as it was pointed out, we can, always ask for extended time. It's an honor for me to serve as moderator for the town, and I assure you that I will run this meeting as efficiently and as fairly as possible. As you know, I have no vote in the outcome of any particular article, so I am neutral. At this point, I have a motion to take Article 27 out of order and make it the first order of business on Wednesday, October 18th. This has been submitted by Mr. Trudell and seconded by Mrs. Burke. Any objections?
Point of information, is that Wednesday you said?
That is Wednesday evening, October 18th. Did I say something else? I'm sorry if I did. Okay, if there are no objections, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That wasn't a good start. You guys did that on purpose, didn't you? Okay, let's try one more time. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. All right, guess what, folks? We're going to a standing vote. I gotta be fair. I think it was a lean, but I'm not sure. Tellers, if you are in favor? Yes, Mark. Yes, you should. Thank you. Do I have a substitute teller in the center section? Thank you, Larry.
Who was it?
Larry Pittman. So tellers, all those tellers in favor of the motion, to postpone until, to make it to the first article of business on Wednesday evening? 3. Is your hand up, John? 4.
4, yes.
Okay, 4 yes, okay. Thank you.
Yeah. How many no?
The noes, please. 2. Okay. All right, all those in favor, please stand. The center folks, please count anybody up here on, actually Mark and the 2 gentlemen down front. Paul, are you RTM? You are, okay, thanks.
And this is to move Article 27 to Wednesday night. And who, yeah, you'll give that to me, because I don't know who wrote it, and you have a second.
John, did you get me? Oh, it's okay.
When you're done, tellers, when you're done and you've confirmed your account, please come down to the microphone so I know you're ready. Oh, actually, no, I take that back. We got to do the no's now. We'll do the yeses, though. I'll get the yes count. Bear with me. John, you're all set? 6 in the left. John Leith, in the center?
No, 6 were yeses.
6 yeses, yep.
Okay.
46? Thank you. And Susan? 20? Thank you. Please take a seat.
Where is she?
All noes, please rise.
No. Maybe 102. I think so.
I'll find out real quick.
Yep, I will. Yep.
John? 6 noes, thank you. 26? And Bill? 11? Yes, sir. Thank you.
Really? What do you have for no's?
6, 26, and 11.
On the right side, you got 11. Yep. 6 on the left side.
This is left, center,
Center, we got 26 no's, right?
yeah, 11. So that's 13, carry the 143,
And you
right?
had these two. So it's 12, 13,
Oh,
14,
you know what?
15.
I didn't count my tellers, you're
1, 2,
right.
3, 4, so
I
45.
gotta add my tellers, 4 to 2.
20,
So 76 to 45, right?
6 is 20, 52. I have 6, 76 to 45. Let me see how many I had to come in.
Well, the vote was 76 yes to 45 noes, so the motion passes. We will take Article 27 as the first order of business on Wednesday evening, October 18th.
Thank you.
At this point in time, I also have a preliminary motion and second from the Finance Committee to waive the reading of the warrant. As has been practice of the town, if it's a short article, I will read it. If it's a long article, I will not, and just refer to it on screen. I have shortened those zoning board articles just to refer to the language in your booklet. You'll see the motions when they come up. Questions or comments? The Finance Committee motion requires a simple majority vote. Are there any objections? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? It is a vote. I have another motion that all motions of the Finance Committee be the main motion. Questions or comments? There being none, this also requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? It is a vote. We will now proceed to Article 1, a general article that remains open throughout the town meeting. In Article 1, it is moved the town will hear and act on the report of any committee, or to choose any committee of the town, think proper, and transact any other business that may legally come before the town. We have 3 presentations that I'm aware of at this time. The town administrator will speak on the building update. Jim?
Sure. Mike, if you could pull up my slide, please. Oh, next one. Okay, just a brief update on the 4 municipal buildings that we're constructing at this time. All 4 buildings are underway and they're in various phases of the construction process. Mike, next slide. The first one I'm going to start with is the police station. That's the one that's furthest along in construction. We're looking at a groundbreaking. We held a groundbreaking in the spring. As you can see here in some of these pictures, we are pretty far along in the process. Currently, the siding is going on the building. The parking lot, the binder is down. It is paved, not with the final coat, though. We are looking at an occupancy sometime in the March-April timeframe for that location, right off of South Street. Mike, next slide, please. The next building is the fire station. Again, that project is running on schedule and on budget. We are looking at a projected time frame of the June 2018 or so. It is progressing well. PBC's been doing an excellent job managing that project. And Mike, next slide, please. The next building is the Council on Aging. We're currently going to be calling it the South Street Center. That building is set to have a groundbreaking ceremony held at the end of this month. We haven't picked a date yet because we're currently waiting for the sign-off on the parking lot across the street, which is the Superfund site. I really don't want to have people parking on the construction site, so I'm guessing it's likely going to be around October 30th or so. But again, that's on time, on budget. Currently, we're still really in the early stages there. We've selected an excellent architect to work with. We went and viewed the Wellesley site, which is going to be almost the same exact building as what we have now. We're very impressed with it. The Friends of Walpole Elders are doing an excellent job, along with Cliff Snuffer and Rich McCarthy. And that's it for that building. Mike, next slide, please. And the last one is the vehicle maintenance garage. What you see today on the top right there is a picture I took this afternoon. We are set to, we've already begun the foundation work on that site. That will take about 6 or so weeks. We want to get that done before the winter sets in. The building is being delivered on December 21st. Again, that'll probably take about 6 to 8 weeks to set up and put the structure up. The crews will work through the winter, and we're going to be working with the Voc School in Franklin. We've already met with some of the teachers and the superintendent over there. They're going to be doing some of our HVAC, electrical, and plumbing work there, possibly some others if we can fit them in. It's more of a cost-saving measure. And that's really it as far as the building update. I want to thank the PBC and the Board of Selectmen for their guidance with this process. They're progressing well. 4 buildings at once is a lot to take on, but we have some good project managers. We have some good architects we're working with. So thank you very much. That's it.
Thanks, Jim. We now have a presentation from Mr. Pilar for the Town Hall Reuse Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. My name is Richard Peeler. I'm an RTM from Precinct 7, and it's an honor to be here this evening before all of you. Last week, we gave the Board of Selectmen an update, and that's what we're here to do this evening. I'd like to recognize some of my fellow committee members. Cliff Barnes, why don't you all stand? Christine Cochran, Roger Turner. Is Beth Pellick here? Beth Pellick, Mark Trudell, Ron Facile. These folks, along with myself and others, when the Board of Selectmen started this committee, we've been meeting back in March. We've been meeting the third Tuesday of every month. One of the things that we agreed from the very beginning, that we would enter this project with no preconceived notion as to what we would be recommending to the Board of Selectmen and to town meeting. We wanted to be as objective as possible and felt that if we were going to come up with the best idea and the most feasible idea, we needed to look at all options. And the first thing we did was to hold a public forum. Several people attended that forum. A lot of great ideas and good insight was presented that evening. We took that information and we then had a follow-up meeting, a public meeting with EDC and downtown merchants. As we look at Old Town Hall, we're looking at it not in a vacuum, but in the context of the downtown, because we feel that Old Town Hall was a catalyst for development in 1881 when it was first constructed, and we see it as a catalyst for redevelopment of downtown in the coming years. We also were able and fortunate to have several people step forward. There's a tremendous amount of talent in this town, and many of those folks stepped forward, and I just wanted to recognize some of them because they've been terrific to work with and have done a tremendous amount of good. And that group includes, we call it our resource group, and that includes David Norton, the Walpole Building Commissioner, Mark Romero, Planning Board member, Sam Obar, Chairman of the Historical Commission, Eric Hurwitz, and in particular, I want to thank Jeremiah. I keep on mispronouncing his name, so Jeremiah, I apologize, but Jeremiah Husson, who's a local architect. One of the things in looking at the building was try to determine what it is that we've been asked to work on. And there were plans that were done when the building was first constructed, but we didn't have any existing condition plans. As you know, over the years, the building has had multiple uses, everything from a gymnasium to a courthouse, and most recently to the police station. And through all of those changes, things were added, deleted, and we didn't have any existing condition plans. And Jeremiah volunteered his time, and we had some really hot days this past summer. And he was in town, in the police station, up every nook and cranny to put these plans together. So now we have something to work from. Because many of the ideas that have been suggested will depend, and whether or not we're able to implement them will depend on the physical structure. The second thing that we have undertaken was a building audit. What condition is the building, the systems? And the third, another item is to do a highest and best use analysis. You know, having a good idea is one thing, but does it pencil out? Do the numbers work? Is it practical? Does it fall within what zoning allows? So That's another particular study that we're in the process and near completion. And then the third is an environmental assessment. Now that we have not started yet because we're going to need to go to the Board of Selectmen for funding to retain the services of an environmental engineer to measure or determine the extent. We know that the building has some environmental issues. We just don't know the extent of that. And so that is another item that we will have to address. The building is significant. It has tremendous presence along the streetscape. From whichever direction you're entering the downtown, you see that building. So not only architectural, not only because of its location, but because of its history and its architecture, it really is the landmark. It really is that one physical item in the town that represents the town. So when people drive through it, they know, oh, this is Walpole. And we want to make sure that whatever we come back to you with in the spring, that it maintains the character not only of the building, but preserves the history, and there's tremendous history in that building I can't see behind me, but you'll see some of the interior slides, and there are 2 plaques in that building that honor war dead from the town of Walpole. So it's a memorial, the building. It has the historic significance. And Roger Turner, who knows more about that building than anybody, I'm sure, in town, someday pull him aside and say, hey, can you tell me something about Old Town Hall? And, but allow yourself 2 or 3 hours, maybe even longer, because there is that much that he can tell you about the building. So we want to assure you that we're looking at all of the options. But when we come back to you, what we will present in our report, the recommendations, are going to be uses that will mean something, that will have a benefit to the town. Cliff Snuff always talks about the quality of life in the town of Walpole. This is an addition. Nothing against the police department using the building today, but that we're glad you're leaving to go to another building, because we want to unleash the potential of that building. And we think that we will be offering something that you will all be proud of. But whatever it is, we want to make sure that it's feasible. We don't want this report to collect dust on someone's bookshelf. All of us are putting a lot of time into this. There'll be others that will be asked to join, because we want that final product really to be something special, because the building is special, the town is special, the downtown is special. And as I said, this is the catalyst for the redevelopment of downtown, which has tremendous potential. So that report will be, as I believe, will be a combination of cultural, educational, historical, commercial activity, all coming together to create something very special. And we look forward to coming back to you in the spring meeting with that report. And the last thing I want to say, which was on the screen and up front, our other objective is to, whatever the conclusion is that we arrive at, not only will it will be of significant value to the town, but we want to do it in the most affordable way. This project, we're not looking to come back to you where you need to go for an override or an exemption. This project needs to pencil out. That is an obligation that we feel that we have to the taxpayers in the town of Walpole, and we want to assure them that this is not going to be a pie-in-the-sky thing, that is going to put added financial burden on the taxpayers of Walpole. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Pillow. We have a third presentation from Mr. Valencourt, Chair of the Finance Committee.
Thank you, Dan. I've just got a couple of handouts. I don't have enough for everyone, but I will pass out a few. Get a little further some figures. So. Gonna give the- Thank you. I'll make some available here. I'll refer to some of these numbers in general, but there is copies available for folks that want to take a look at it. So, thank you, Dan. Through you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, so I'll just be brief. So I'm going to give a Finance Committee report. I'm the new chairman of the Finance Committee, so I was elected this past summer, so for FY18. It's my third year on FinCom, and I'm honored to serve as chairman. You know, like others that serve the town, you know, I'm committed to doing a good job and working hard and, you know, passionate about the work that we do. So, you know, I take the responsibility pretty seriously. You know, I've been a financial person for, you know, 30 years. I've spent my career in finance. So I'm a licensed CPA in Massachusetts. I'm currently a CFO. So, you know, I've been at this for about 30 years. So, you know, some principles that I believe are very important in the financial area. That's, you know, transparency, you know, accuracy, and, you know, once you have all the information, you know, you can make the best decisions. So I think it's important to provide transparency. So I want to address the free cash. So we have a number of articles in front of town meeting this season, and those articles call for spending about $4 million out of free cash. Many of the RTMs are new, and even for others, you know, that have served for some time, free cash can be a bit confusing to people to really, you know, understand what it is and how it's created. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about that. And free cash is when your, you know, when your actual revenues exceed your budgeted revenues, right? You take in more money than you budgeted for, and when your actual expenditures are less than the expenditures that you put in your budget. Those are the two things that really generate and lead to free cash. And, you know, one example might be the prison mitigation money, which historically the town leaves out of the budget because we don't know if we're going to get it. So that's a prudent step to take, but that's probably, you know, somewhat of an outlier. Most of the items are, you know, normal revenue items, motor vehicle taxes, other taxes and fees, and then even the expenses, you know, salaries and other expenses. Those are the typical things that are over or under that generate free cash. You know, so as a chairman of the Finance Committee and working with the team, you know, what I've experienced and what we've seen is that I think Walpole has a great opportunity to improve its budgeting process to become a lot more accurate. And I say this because we see the amount of free cash that's generated, you know, year in and year out. And so, again, you know, it's nice to be a little conservative, but I think at the end of the day, in fairness to the taxpayers and in fairness to the constituents, you know, it is scarce resources. So if they are available, I think they should be called out and budgeted, you know, in the normal course. So, you know, for instance, if you're just looking at expenses, and what I've got here is I just went back through the last 3 years from the budget report furnished from the town administrator's office. And generally on expenses, we tend to not spend somewhere between 5 and 7% of our line item expenses. So, you know, that adds up to significant dollars. You know, in any year, that's anywhere from 1.7 million, you know, up to almost $3 million in unspent expenses. And, you know, those are against an expense base before the schools, excluding the schools, of 38 million to 42 million. So the schools, they seem to be very accurate with spending whatever resources are provided to them. Most of this other stuff seems to be, you know, more on the municipal side. And then on the revenue side, again, putting the tax revenue aside, because we pretty much, that's all the property tax revenue, that seems to be spent, but it's the other revenue areas, motor vehicle taxes, hotel meals, town fees, licenses and permitting. Those are typically under budgeted by 23 to 46% on an annual basis. And if you take out the prison mitigation funding, that brings it down. So that brings it down to 23 to 36%. And so that's the real cash we're talking about here. It's anywhere from, the revenue amounts are anywhere from 1.2 million to, 2.7 million of extra revenue. So again, just to kind of set the table here, those are the details. These funds end up in free cash, and then free cash, the process for spending free cash is more arbitrary than the spring budgeting process, where everything is put in a schedule. There's a process of review and prioritization, and that's probably a better place to really decide where to spend this type of money. And we'll see, for instance, Article 3 and Article 5, there's a capital budgeting schedule and process. Things get prioritized, and then they're usually in the capital budget schedule for years before they make it to the top. Things like Article 3 and 5, they were never in the capital plan until this year. So I think, I advise to follow the process of the prioritization.
John, we have a point of order.
Yep.
Yes, Ms. Lawson.
I understand this is a broad Article 1, but it sounds to me like the chairman of the Finance Committee is getting into Article 27, which I thought we voted on this side. Deal with that on Wednesday, person.
Point of order.
Excuse me, John, that's my call. Please, I'm just going to let you continue, but please keep your comments specific to free cash and
Yeah.
do not stray into any article. Thank you.
They're right there. Thank you. Yep, so through you, Mr. Moderator, I'm almost done. So again, the recommendation, and again, it's just for an example, it was an example of how the free cash process can be somewhat arbitrary versus the typical spring budgeting process of expenditures and capital budgeting, when all the committees come and all the constituents come. And in essence, that's money that really leads to what would otherwise perhaps be higher taxation. If we knew that money was available, then we may not have to tax so much, because there are these other funds available that are not in the budget. They flow into free cash. Today we've got 6.6 million available in free cash. We're going to talk about that. And that's after we've recently spent 9.4 million on facilities. So after all that, we're still left with the 6.6 million, and we just spent 9.4 million on facilities. So I hope you found that helpful. I thought it was interesting in my role as FinCom chairman, FinCom member, to really understand what free cash is all about. So I hope I didn't take up too much of your time, but that's it for me.
Thank you, Mr. Valencourt. Any other presentations under Article 1 that I'm not already aware of? Okay, we will move to Article 2. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town raise and appropriate from taxation the sum of $44,000 and transfer $19,300 from the ambulance reserve receipt account to defray departmental and incidental expenses for the town for the fiscal year 2018 commencing July 1, 2017, and to distribute that amount to the following budgets: $27,000 to elections salary, $5,000 to elections expense, $7,850 to the Board of Health salaries, $4,150 to Board of Health expense, $10,000 fire department expense, $9,300 to Safety and Survival Grant. This is a petition of the Board of Selectmen. Mr. Valencourt, Finance Committee vote?
Finance Committee voted favorable action 12-0-0.
Thank you, Mr. Valencourt. Mr. Gallivan, the Board of Selectmen?
Selectmen voted favorable action 5-0-0.
Thank you, Mr. Gallivan. If I say Kraus, because that's what I wrote in my notes. Any questions or comments with regard to Article 2? There being none, this motion requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? It is unanimous. It is a vote. Article 3, appropriation for permitting and designing new playing fields. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town vote to transfer from free cash the sum of $500,000 to pay costs associated with permitting and designing new playing fields in the town of Walpole, along with any and all work and costs incidental and related thereto, including costs of project management, as well as demolition of any existing building or structure and other necessary site improvements. This is a petition of the Board of Selectmen. I believe the town administrator has a few comments.
Sure, and I'm actually going to call upon Patrick Shield to help me out, so do
Sure.
you mind if he
Patrick,
comes
you
down?
want to come down front, please?
Patrick Shields, our Recreation Director. Just to get started, Mike, will you click on PowerPoint? Article 1 requests $500,000 from free cash to design new playing fields at the Route 1A facility that the town recently required a few years back. Next slide, please. Patrick, I'll hand it off to you for slides 2 through 5.
Is this the right PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Okay. So good evening. My name is Patrick Shield. I'm the Recreation Director for the town of Walpole. As the town administrator just mentioned, Article 3 seeks $500,000 from free cash for the town to obtain plans and specifications to build new athletic fields along the Norfolk town border. For some background information, the Recreation Department's role is to coordinate and permit each of the athletic fields, which are overseen and maintained by the Parks Division of the Department of Public Works. This involves close coordination with each of the sports groups in town, including Walpole High School Athletic Department, Walpole Youth Football and Cheer, Walpole Youth Soccer, Walpole Boys and Girls Lacrosse, Walpole Little League, Babe Ruth, American Legion, and others. For many years, there's been an identified shortage of athletic fields to accommodate the demand for each of these groups. This has been documented through memoranda and reports that have been written dating back to at least the 1980s. So this request seeks funding to design a field complex that would address the shortage and reduce the overcrowding and overuse of these fields. So actually, next slide, please. So here we go. So in the chart behind me, you'll see a breakdown of each of the public fields in Walpole, the number of acres, the type of field, and the primary uses of these fields, amounting to approximately 24 acres of natural grass and 1.5 acres of synthetic turf. So here you'll see the field, the number of acres, the primary users, and the primary purposes. Next slide, please. So as many in this room are already aware, Walpole has a long tradition of athletic excellence, evidenced by one of the most recent titles on display in the slideshow behind me by the 2016 Field Hockey Division I state champions. Year-round, approximately 3,000 athletes rely on good quality fields ranging from age 2 to their senior year in high school. So that includes about 720 athletes from the high school, approximately 1,500 athletes from the youth leagues here in town, and another 800 registrants in the Fields Recreation Department program. So I'd like to just reflect on that for a minute. There's about 3,000 athletes here in town, not to mention their parents, coaches, and other people who are involved in local youth sports. So next slide, please. And here's just more pictures of some of the teams that use the fields. I'd like to point out I think Chief Carmichael's in this picture here. So this is another way of the police department helping out with their community policing and also building a strong community group here. So next slide, please. So despite all this, the demand for field space exceeds capacity, which I'll get into a little bit more into detail in just a moment. The field space that each of these leagues are looking for to provide the full extent of their program is limited, through the course of not just practice times, but being able to provide space for tournaments. And I understand a lot of people in this room who are parents of players that play in tournaments have to go quite a distance to get there. Additionally, overuse of the field exposes the conditions to being overstressed, which can then lead to risk of injury to the players. So, next slide, please. So this is information that I had requested from each of the leagues, specifically to show the demand for multi-use field spaces. I was looking at this, I noticed an error specifically for youth soccer. I don't think that they only have. Oh, They have 67 teams for their 112 players, so just bear with me here for that. But the way that it's broken down, if you just want to take a look at this, on the top we've got each of the leagues that use they use the fields, current information on each of those leagues, as well as their current field use and the demand for the use. So for instance, boys and girls lacrosse, they've got 353 players combined. Currently, they're allowed 17 spaces for their fields at a duration of an hour and a half each. So right now they're using the fields for 25 and a half hours each week, when in reality they're really looking for about 78 practice slots, totaling about 117 hours each week. I would also just point out football, they have the requisite field space. They don't need any more time for practices or games. But those of you who have had night meetings at Town Hall this past fall have seen them out on Stone Field, you know just how overcrowded that field can be. So they're looking for some more space specifically to kind of to grow out and expand. Next slide, please. I think at this point I'll turn it back to the town administrator.
Okay, just a little bit of background on this. Some other locations have been considered. We highlighted them here, Johnson and Jarvis Farm. We are restricted with what we can do as far as those specific locations because they're in some of our well-protected areas, and the DEP has enforcement orders over them. So we're limited as to what we can do with those specific spaces. Next slide, please, Mike. Just some background on this. Back in 2008, the town enlisted the services of Weston and Sampson to conduct a comprehensive field study and inventory. They noted in their study that other towns have moved more aggressively to expand their field venues based upon their increased participation. At the time, Walpole was recommending that we also add new field space, but funds were a problem. We did the best with what we have. We expanded areas at Turco Field as far as adding lights. We increased the field playing space at the Elm Street School, the Boyden School, and expanded the playing area at the Fisher Elementary School. We have not increased our field inventory space. This article is the first step to do that and would bring Walpole in line with some of what the other towns do surrounding us. It will allow us to follow up on the 2013 vote of town meeting that authorized the purchase of this parcel. Town officials, including myself and Patrick and some members of the Board of Selectmen, have met with the various user groups, the field's presidents, to see what they and their needs want. Basically, what do you think of our conceptual plan that you'll see here in a few minutes? We took their feedback, worked with Weston and Sampson to bring you what you have here. On the next slide, please. Basically, what we're looking to do here is expand upon the usage of the playing space. The next, Mike, next slide, please. It's going to bring up more than 200 parking spaces. There's room for expansion in the future. It's expected that this design phase will take about a year. It will likely come back to town meeting in the next 1 to 3 years with construction bids in hand and a proposal for this body to consider. As you can see, basically the left side there is the current layout, and the right side here is the proposal. Again, that's conceptual. It will be vetted once we hire an architectural firm to consider this. Mike, next slide, please. Just some pictures of some surrounding fields. As some of us parents may know, our kids were out playing soccer, field hockey, lacrosse, football. And I always go to these fields and say, well, why can't Walpole have this nice field? You know, this is the spot on Pond Street in Norfolk, down in North Attleboro, a field layout they have there. Mike, next slide. 2 other complexes in Framingham and Franklin. That's what we're looking to bring here, a multi-use space that can be used not only by soccer or football, by everyone, and can sustain multiple events at the same time, youth and high school athletics. Next slide, please. Budget. A lot of people, there was a lot of debate about the budget and how can Walpole withstand. It's about $7 million and change here, and that's today's dollars. That doesn't include escalation. This approach here allows for a phased-in approach with the fields. If we don't have enough funding here in place in the next few years, we could always build something in the debt budget where possibly, maybe we just do 1 turf field. Right now, Walpole only has the 1 turf field here at the high school. In comparison to other towns, that's a low number. So we're allowed to phase in on that one. It will provide us some flexibility for the next 3 to 10 years to build up these field projects. Mike, next slide, please. And that's it for me. So.
Thanks, Jim. So again, this is a petition of the Board of Selectmen. Mr. Valencourt, the Finance Committee vote?
Finance Committee vote, favorable action, 1301.
Thank you, Mr. Valencourt. Mr. Gallivan, Board of Selectmen vote?
Selectmen voted 4-1-0.
Thank you, Mr. Gallivan. Any other questions or comments with regard to Article 3? Please come forward.
Mr. Moderator, the Capital Budget Committee voted favorable action 5-0.
I apologize. 5-2-0?
Correct.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Moderator, Al Tedesco, Precinct 7, as well as Capital Budget Committee. I just wanted to make a couple of points about this request. A $7 to $9 million capital budget project puts it at probably number 4 or maybe 5 on the list of some large capital projects that we've got in our portfolio at this point. And each one of these capital projects incurs year-over-year operating expenses. We saw a few slides on this particular one, and we had discussions at capital budget as to what this year-over-year expense might be. And at this point, I don't think we have any accurate projections on that. And it may be safe to say that for all of these capital projects that are going to be coming online soon, we might not have accurate forecasts as to what it's going to cost. So cumulatively, this can have an impact on the annual budget that really lasts for quite a long time. Okay, so we're not building just these buildings. We're also committing to maintain the buildings and the fields and to run them year over year. Okay, it was also mentioned that earlier in some of the presentations that we do have a 5-year plan, that most of these projects do come through. That's what gives us a holistic picture of all of these projects in our portfolio. Oftentimes we don't have the operating budget in there, but at least we get a look at the total capital expenses as to what the taxpayers and the people who are operating all of these facilities have to support for many years to come. So for that reason, I voted no on capital budget, and I would recommend to the people in this room that they also vote no on this particular allocation of funds, and potentially can be brought in next year into the 5-year plan, and we can see it holistically with all of the other commitments that are coming down the road.
Thank you, Mr. Tedesco.
Thank you.
Archie.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Maraski, Precinct 8. I was looking at the FY 2017 5-year capital plan projects that runs to 2022. That was in the back of the spring warrant that was handed out to RTM members and to the citizens. I don't see anything on this fields on the capital budget as a capital budget item. When was this added?
John or Ed, do you guys have any comments on that?
Well, I would defer to the town administrator, but the town has worked over the last 4 years to purchase this property, so it just came up, and the town administrator, found funds available to do just the design of this project at this time. And I just want to say that, like I said, this is just for the design of the project, and it really has, the plans would have an unlimited shelf life, so it would be nice to get the plans ready for future development, that whether it comes in the 1, 5, or 10 years down the road. But
thank you, Mr. Forsberg. Jim, do you have further comments?
Just to follow up to that, Joe, this question has been raised by a couple of residents to me. I actually asked to add it on to the capital, this, to be considered this fall, because I think that it was proper to formalize it. If you may recall, none of the buildings that we had just recently funded were on the 5-year plan. Capital, in, I believe, all the cases, did not provide a vote to town meeting with this. I thought it was appropriate that they consider this matter. Back in '08, as I previously mentioned, Weston and Sampson did identify the need for expanded fields in the town. At the time, we did not own this property. They identified Robbins Road as a possible site that we didn't pursue because some of the neighbors weren't pleased with that. So when we purchased the property in 2013, the town meeting was well aware of this purchase, and it's really to get the ball rolling. And Ed is correct. I expect that this plan, we're still using the 2008 field inventory plan. It doesn't go on the shelves. It actually gets used, and I expect that this plan will be in place if it's funded.
Okay, so this is the first year that, Mr. Moderator, this is the first year that it's showing up on the capital budget listing.
Yes.
Thanks, Joe.
De facto. What you showed us on the overheads, is there any other type of storyboard, sketch, design in existence? Is that the only thing that we have in existence right now, what you showed us? Through you, Mr. Moderator.
Jim?
Mr. Moderator, yes, there are, I believe I'm aware of 2 other conceptual plans that were presented to the user groups. They were concerned about the layout and the parking. They specifically was concerned, one of the maps showed only 100 spaces, so parking was an issue.
Okay, thank you. And through you, Mr. Moderator, where did the figure $500,000 come from? That seems to be extremely high to me for design.
Jim, do you have comments on that?
Mr. Moderator, yes, that was provided from Weston and Sampson this while they were conducting the conceptual study, and it was reiterated to them, by them to me in June, that that was a definite firm amount to design this many fields at one time.
And through you, Mr. Moderator, is that a formal report, formal written report, or is that a verbal report, off-the-cuff type of number?
Jim?
I do have formal documentation on that, and Joe, if you'd like, I could give you that quotation.
That's fine, thank you. Can you tell town meeting what is meant by the phrase, including all incidental and related costs? I can't imagine what other costs could be incidental or related to designing fields.
Defer, Mr. Chair.
Town Council?
Defer to Town Council on this one.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Moderator, through you. The language, all work and costs incidental and related thereto, is something that we routinely recommend because there are often costs with respect to construction easements, licenses, and so forth that come up that aren't anticipated, and this allows the latitude to deal with those.
Thank you.
Okay. In the article, part of the $500,000 includes permitting a field with which I guess you're just talking about, and Town Council is talking about. Are we talking about only local permits? And if so, my understanding is for municipal projects, local permits can be waived by asking the local permitting authority to waive the fee. It's a Walpole project. So are there outside permits that are being sought here?
Jim?
Mr. Moderator, basically, this is going to cover us in case it was a state-owned piece of property back in 2013. It's going to cover us if the DEP comes forward and requires us to file some type of permit with them, or the Army Corps of Engineers. It's an encompassing wording here. I did go back and look, and we had similar wording for the construction, request for design services for the police and for the fire station too.
And through you, Mr. Moderator.
Hey, Joe, excuse me one sec.
Just a couple more questions.
Well, hang on a second, okay? I've actually allowed for the responses, which have been rather lengthy. So I'm going to just go to Mr. Pilar for a second, who's been standing there for a moment.
Sure.
And we'll come back to you. I don't see other members right now. Thank you, sir. Mr. Pilar.
If you don't mind, Mr. Moderator, Peeler.
Sorry, Mr. Peeler.
It's all right. nothing personal.
I'm gonna write down the phonetic.
Thank you very much. Through you, Mr. Moderator, a question regarding the 500,000. I don't know if that is an accurate number, but how did we arrive at the number? You mentioned, Jim, the consultants. How many consulting firms did we put this proposal out to?
So, Mr. Pia?
Pila.
I'll get it. Jim, you may respond to Mr. Pila's. Please direct your questions to the moderator, and I'll direct it accordingly. I know where they're going, but if you could please follow protocol, I'd appreciate that. Jim?
Again, we only received one estimate. It's not a quote, it's an estimate from a design firm, Weston and Sampson, who have designed multiple fields in Peabody, Pembroke, multiple other towns, but that was based upon their estimates. We have not bid this out.
Well, if you're asking town meeting to approve 500,000, maybe the number, if we went out to, got bids from 2, 3, 4 companies that do the same work, I'm sure they're all excellent, that maybe the cost would be 250, 300, 400,000. But to just say because one firm comes in with a bid of 500,000 that we're going to give them the contract, I don't think that that's being diligent on our part.
Is that a question or a comment, Mr. Pia?
That's a statement.
Thank you.
Comment.
Mr. Moderator, just to follow up on that statement.
Yes.
We would formally bid out. We'd actually do a request for proposals where we would have a screening committee get together. The amount would be negotiated. I would not take their first offer. As many of these department heads know, I'm very cautious, and someone may call me cheap, but I would do my due diligence on that, and we would definitely not exceed that amount, and I would look for us to come in below that amount.
So Mr. Moderator, so my question, follow-up question is, will there be an RFP? So we're approving 500, but not necessarily going to spend 500 on this work that has to be done, because we're going to go to an RFP process, and the number from another company that does this work might come in at 375,000.
Mr. Valencourt? Or Mr. Johnson?
I'm sorry, why am I being called up?
Well,
I'm happy to answer, but I don't think it's me.
Mr. Johnson.
Mr. Moderator, yes, we are required, we would by law do an RFP, and we would send out proposals. We'd advertise it in the Central Register, and we'd advertise it in the newspaper.
Okay, great. My other question, Mr. Moderator, is once the facility is constructed and it is in use, has it been determined what the operational costs are going to be in terms of maintaining the fields, the labor necessary to do that work? Will it increase the number of staff to conduct that work and to oversee the various programs, et cetera?
Mr. Valencourt? Mr. Johnson?
Mr. Moderator, through you, we would actually, the answer is no, not at this time. We do not know what the actual added cost would be there. As part of the RFP, I would require the firm that we hire and select provide us with some cost projections and estimates by working with Bob Blank, Robert Bryan, Drew Hand, and our Parks Department. So I would, once we come back for some funding in a few years, I would have those answers for you. I would say, I expect that once this comes online, we'd need up to 1 to 2 new personnel. We'd need X, Y, or Z piece of equipment, so I would have that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Abbott?
Bill Abbott, Precinct 6. I just want to bring up that the practice that we're following here is something that we do regularly. You have to come up with some way of saying, well, how much do we need? So you ask somebody that you're dealing with, in this case, Weston and Sampson. I know in sewer and water, we deal with the engineering. You say, this is what we're looking to do. I don't know whether it's 100,000, 1,500,000, and they would say, for this type of thing, you're probably going to need about 500,000 for this particular project. And then at that point, now we have a number that you can put for an article. You then go out to bid, as Jim has indicated, and you'll find out, will somebody do it? Much less, probably. In fact, they'll probably come in less because they know you're only going to be able to spend $500,000 at max. So it's nothing unusual that we don't do all the time. You have to somehow get that initial number, and then you go out to bid. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Abbott. Ms. Regusta? Okay, sorry. Did you have a question?
Mr. Moderator. Yes, I'd just like to finish up with a couple of items. I'm assuming that it's not possible to have this done in-house or have the Norfolk County surveyors or engineers be involved in this project.
Mr. Johnson?
No, this is something, and I'm not to be disrespectful to our engineering department and Norfolk County engineers. This is well beyond the scope of work to design.
And the last question I have, Mr. Moderator, unless it's answered differently, why isn't this land being considered, why is this land being considered for fields first? And why isn't it as one of the options in the school building study by the school committee?
Mr. Johnson.
Mr. Moderator, through you. The reason, Joe, is part of the RFP that the state issued on this when they were required to publicly bid this out. We were the only bidder because we were the only town that could acquire this. But they specifically stated in their deed that we were not allowed to put structures on there or any existing standing facilities. They specifically wanted it to remain green space. They were very mindful of the stormwater runoff that would be created as a result of anything else, and it specifically says in the deed it can't be used.
So, through you, Mr. Moderator, so those deed restrictions cannot be lifted, or have we ever even asked?
They cannot be lifted. It was just, we just agreed to it. We just accepted the land. Mr. Moderator, through you, I'm sorry. We just accepted the land 2 years ago.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Boraski. Go ahead, Ann.
Ann Regusta, Precinct 3. I'm troubled by this article for several reasons. Mr. Tedesco discussed one of them as it relates to the capital budget plan. But in my mind, and I voted against this when it came before the Board of Selectmen, this, while it is asking for $500,000 with this article, it's really a $7 to $9 million project. And this $500,000 is nothing more than a down payment on that project. And I don't think it's appropriate to be asking the taxpayers while we are in the process of building 3 new facilities at the cost of $30 million to even think now about spending $7 to $9 million on playing fields. We have a statement of interest with the Commonwealth to potentially build a new high school at a cost of well over $100 million. I think it's very, very, very premature to be sinking $500,000, I'm sorry, I should be looking at you, $500,000 into, again, what is not a $500,000 project, but in fact a $7 to $9 million project, and is not even anticipated to be regardless of how the plans come out, to be built for, I know Jim, you said 1 to 3 years, but however long it takes. This is more appropriate to be put on the capital budget plan, compete with other capital budget projects, and then bring it back to town meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Regusta. Ms. Corey?
Hi, Val Corey, Precinct 2, and a couple of people said things that I was quite thinking of. I totally have Ann's sentiments, and I don't see the point, quite frankly, of asking for that much money right now to assess the fields and get the plans when we, quite frankly, don't even know if they're going to be authorized to be built. And if they are, it will be in another 3 years. And I agree with Ann, we got a lot of money we're spending it now as we build 3 beautiful buildings. We're going to be spending it on schools. We know we will. And we don't know what those schools are going to be like. We don't know what fields we're going to have with those schools, what fields we're going to lose. Maybe we're going to get more fields. Maybe we're going to get better fields, better parking. We don't even have all that done. I think things have to be done like one at a time, in order of importance, I guess. So the police, the fire, the senior, that one in order of importance. Whatever comes next, I think we have to wait. I don't think it's an emergency. And quite frankly, like I said, and another question though, if I think it was Richard, but I don't remember now. Let's say it was 250,000 and not 500,000, so great deal. What happens to that other 250 where we authorized 500,000? Do you know what I mean?
Mr. Johnson?
Mr. Moderator, through you. If we're fortunate enough to have this project come in at 250,000,
yeah,
we will spend it to the 250,000. You can
Right.
do one of two things. We can either roll those funds forward towards the funding of the actual project, or town meeting can vote at a later date to reappropriate the remaining 200,000. We just don't, it doesn't just go away.
Okay. And what if town meeting in 3 years doesn't vote on the project? Or then do we, because we've already spent 500,000 or more to make the plans? I don't know, I think it's really premature. I'm all for more fields and more parking spaces. I have nothing against athletes or sports. In fact, I enjoy them. I just think that, there's got to be priorities at some point in the town of Walpole and how we spend our money, and I think this should wait. And like I said, I think it's important because I think we might gain fields or usage or maybe have some better planning once we know what we're doing with the schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Corey. Mr. Hamilton, John, after Mr. Hamilton, I'll come to you because I saw your arm. Right, you wanted to, after Mr. Hamilton?
Sure.
Cliff, just so you know.
Yep,
okay?
thank you.
Mr. Hamilton?
Hamilton, Precinct 5. I've been on both sides of an issue like this, and I agree with Water Commissioner Abbott that this is the way it's been done for years and years and years. But I can tell you, I love being on the other side. When I was given up front, when a little bird whispered in my ear that $500,000 was being allocated for this project, I would look at it and I would try to find out what the best way to do that was, and if there were little things that I would like to do and I could squeeze them in under the $500,000, I can guarantee you that the bid would come in at just under $500,000. In reality, we try to be below what we thought was going to bid against us. But the town needs to find a better way of not releasing what we're looking or willing to spend before the bid comes in. Because I guarantee you, I wasn't the only one doing this, but once you know what the amount is, you're going to go as close to the top of that amount as you can and beat the other bidders out. So I think we need to find a better way of doing it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. Mr. Valencourt.
Yes, thank you through you, Mr. Moderator. Valencourt, RTM Precinct 5. So just, with respect to the fields, I've raised my kids here in Walpole. They're teenagers now, so we've played all the sports: softball, baseball, soccer, basketball. I've also coached pretty much all of those sports as well. I've also served as the treasurer of Walpole Little League, so I've had firsthand knowledge about the condition of the fields and the population of athletes and kids that want to play sports. So I certainly acknowledge the fields, they need improvement, and we need additional fields. And I took the time to speak with the presidents of almost every single league of all of the sports teams here in Walpole. I made time to reach out and talk to almost all of them to get their feedback and their input and find out, how they're thinking about this. So, and I think, some sports are more deficient in fields than others. So, for example, lacrosse really has no fields of their own, whereas baseball, they're pretty much all set. And the other sports are somewhere in between. So, and some of these coaches suggested alternatives. And I made the point at FinCom, we have a lot of fields in this town. Certainly some of them, could be improved with topsoil, seeding, irrigation, right? Think of Johnson, Old Post Road, Boyden, because you look at what the soccer association did with Fisher, they turned that into something really special with their own time and effort, irrigation, seed, and that's a really nice field now. So I guess the point that I'm trying to make, there's other alternatives. Lower Turco, that was suggested by a number of people, that could be turned into an artificial field. The little baseball field at the high school, again, do something with that. So, you know, Jarvis Farm, again, there's restrictions, but I heard the restrictions being with respect to putting structures on there. We don't necessarily have to put structures on these facilities. So I look at this as the finance guy, we're gonna go from 0 to 8 million, really. Isn't there anything in between? Can we have some options? A $2 million option, a $3 million option? Why do we have to go to 8 million? It just doesn't seem prudent. When when you're in business, you get different alternatives that are debated and prioritized. I don't think moving forward with $500,000 on the design leading to the 8 million is the best way to go. And also it was discussed that there would be fundraising to offset some of this. I talked to all the presidents. Most of them
Excuse me, Mr. Valencourt, 10 seconds.
Yeah, most of the presidents don't think that their families would be able to contribute to any fundraising. They're already paying $200 to $300 just to participate in the sport. They really didn't see the families being able to dig down and raise any significant funds. So, you know, that's my fact finding. I'm against this article for those reasons.
Thank you, Mr. Valencourt. Mr. Snuffer?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Snuffer, Precinct 2. Through you, Mr. Moderator, to my fellow RTNs. What is it over the years that we have been begging the Board of Selectmen to do and the town administration to do? The word is called planning. Let me suggest to you that in the planning process, they have taken into account the fact that our population is at and growing beyond 25,000. You can look at the people in the town of Walpole and their children, and in my case, great-grandchildren growing up and wanting to serve on different teams and maybe use different fields. The reality of the existing fields is that with the limited time that they are allowed to play on it, they realistically destroy it because it doesn't have time to recover itself. When you look up here, you see something that I think we have been asking for. It is planning. They are planning a project. I want you to know that the senior center, if we could have grouped it in at the appropriate time, would have cost us in the construction phase about $500,000 or $600,000 less. But we couldn't because it wasn't right to put it in the planning phase for the construction. This actually, when you look at a pro forma of our growth, of what our children are planning, what exercise is being requested, how getting into the outdoor environment is indeed, and thank you, Mr. Peeler, for crediting me with it. I will credit Mr. Gober with it. It is a quality of life. It is a quality of life, Mr. Moderator, through you to this body, that I think is worth every penny of that investment. And I trust what they're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Snuffer. Mr. Buckley.
Buckley, Precinct 7, that's pronounced Buckley. It's
My apologies, Mr. Buckley.
It's Obukale in the original Gaelic, but I digress. Buckley, Precinct 7, Vice Chairman of the Rec Committee. This is a wonderful step towards an intergenerational resource for our community. As a point of information, I'm clearly a great athletic booster, but as a point of information, when I was born 31 years ago in Norwood Hospital was when the study was written that we needed more fields. And I have played in the mud of Boyden, I have played in the mud of JMS, and I think there's a great deal of merit to this, and I think it's a wonderful opportunity to plan ahead, and I think for 31 years we've talked about the need, and so if not now to begin, then when? Perhaps my grandchildren could play in these fields. I also think it's important as someone who lives right next to Fisher School to just cite how much use Fisher has week in and week out, every night, every weekend, and how much benefit that field will get when there is a release valve opened. And I just think it's very important that we consider strongly beginning this. And just a point of information to you, Mr. Moderator, to either Mr. Johnson or Mr. Valencourt, if we don't spend $500,000, it just goes back to free cash, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Thank you, Mr. Valencourt.
Right, so it just goes back there. All right, thank you.
Mr. Pittman.
Pittman, Precinct 1. Just so you know, and especially for the newer town meetings, so you, Mr. Moderator, we bought this property a few years ago, and with the intent to put fields there, because we knew there couldn't be any structures. That was the long-range plan for the property. So to echo some of the comments here, we have been thinking about this. This isn't, we didn't pull this out of our back pocket. And to some of the questions regarding maintenance and things like that, right now I can tell you the soccer folks take care of my lawn. They pay for everything through user fees. A lot of the stuff is funded through user fees. The field behind Town Hall, where the football kids play, that's maintained by Walpole Youth Football. So, you know, this is something that's been on the docket for a while. We shouldn't be surprised that we are going to have to probably fund some fields down the line. And maybe part of this design will give us ideas to maybe incrementally put it in place, maybe a couple fields at a time with budget allowances. So I really think we should do this and get it going. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pittman. Ms. Karen?
Cheryl Karen, Precinct 7. I move the question.
Thank you, Susan. The question has been moved. We would just require, and seconded, sorry. The requires a two-thirds vote to move the question. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. Yeah.
Oral votes have lately had people screaming and yelling at the vote. I think we need to have people talk in a normal voice so that votes can be calculated appropriately.
Thank you, Mr. Salvatore. It is a vote. The motion passes. We will now move to a vote favorable action on the Article 3, the appropriation for permitting and designing new playing fields. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
Actually, folks, I think that was a majority. I'm going to say the vote carries. Please stand. Any other members wish to stand and challenge my decision on the vote? I guess not. Thank you. It is a vote. I think that's an excellent suggestion, and that's exactly where I was going next. So please come back in 10 minutes, and remember the Honor Society is outside with the bake sale. Thank you.
See, Tim didn't think we'd get through this article tonight. Please.
Please return to your seats. Hey, guys, you got me? Am I live yet? Hello?
You want to substitute?
Pete? Are we ready? We good? Okay, thank you. To return back, I have a motion to take out of order Article number 29 that has been submitted by Sarah Khatib, Precinct 8, and seconded by Chandler Sullivan, Precinct 2. It is moved to take Article 29 out of order so that it follows Article 15, and this is in order to give courtesy to a citizen-sponsored article. Any questions? Comments? Sorry, I just need to remind myself what the vote is on another order. We just need a majority vote. So all those in favor of taking Article 29 following Article 15 in deference to the citizen-sponsored petition, please say aye. No. Please say aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. Nay. One more time. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. Mr. Salvatore, there's your loud no's. We're going to go to a standing count, folks. I want to be sure on this one. So tellers, please. Do we still have all our tellers? Okay, tellers in favor of the motion, please raise your hands. That works. So 6. Thank you.
Okay, hold on. What did you get?
Huh? 6. Can you wait till standing count over? Thank you. 6 yes. Okay. We have 6 yeses on the tellers. All those in favor, please stand. Middle, don't forget to get up front with the Finance Committee members and the Board of Selectmen.
Not even close. What'd you say? Yeah, they were yelling. Yeah, we're nachos.
Yes, sir. Center. And left, John. 1. Thank you, sir. Please be seated. Yes, Bill? On the right? 27? Thank you. All those opposed, please rise. Wow, you guys have loud voices. Really, really loud voices. Please sit. If everybody's okay, I'm just going to go. That's not even close. Sorry, folks. To Mr. Salvatore's earlier comment, please use your, I was going to use your hallway voice maybe, but yeah, your indoor voice. Let's try not to overpower the vote, because I'm going to tell you up here, Liz agreed with me. That was pretty close. I think it was a majority, but it was pretty close, and I wanted to be certain. So that's just wasted a little bit of time. So I know I've wasted a lot of time tonight as I'm new at this, but if we could kind of watch that, that would be great. So the article, the motion passes. We will take Article 29 after Article 15. I'll just make a quick slide this in so we have this. And we'll move to Article 4. Okay. Article 4 is a petition of the Board of Selectmen, an appropriation for the purchase of a new aerial ladder truck. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town transfer $1,250,000 from free cash to purchase and equip a new aerial ladder truck for the Walpole Fire Department. Mr. Valencourt, Finance Committee voted?
Favorable action, 11-3-0.
Thank you, Mr. Valencourt. Mr. Gallivan, Board of Selectmen?
Selectmen voted favorable action, 4-1.
Thank you, Mr. Gallivan. Mr. Forsberg, Capital Budget?
Mr. Moderator, Capital Budget voted 7-0, favorable action.
Thank you, Mr. Forsberg. Any questions or comments with respect to Article 4? Mr. Salvatore?
Through you, Mr. Moderator, I have several questions about the funding mechanism. It's my understanding of that there is an ambulance fund in which money paid for rescue runs is put into that fund. And I would like to inquire the exact name of that fund and what its current balance is and what it can be used for.
Mr. Johnson or Chief Bailey?
Yes, Mr. Moderator, through you. The current balance is that in that fund as of today is $1,081,676. Historically, the town has used those funds. We've used $650,000, or actually this year we used $665 to assist in the balancing of the budget process. We've used $300 or so for the purchase of a new ambulance, which gets replaced every 2 to 3 years. Most recently, we've used approximately $100,000 to assist in the cost to fund the new fire station. And in the past, we've also used it, I believe, to buy Jaws of Life. Just a few articles ago, you used it to offset the cost, about $19,000 for the ambulance, for the fire department budget. So mostly directly for fire and ambulance expenses only. I can't think of a time that we haven't used it for fire or ambulance expenses.
And through you, Mr. Moderator, may I inquire what the annual replenishment of that fund is?
Mr. Johnson? Or Mr. Valencourt, if you have that number?
Through you, Mr. Ryder, can you repeat the question?
What is the annual replenishment of that fund based on fees collected per year? And is it expected to go up because of the new rates that have been implemented?
Through you, Mr. Moderator, my recollection was that it's somewhere around $1 million per year.
Chief Bailey, can you respond?
It's approximately $900,000 a year.
Thank you, Chief Bailey.
Through you, Mr. Moderator, when was the expenditure for the new ambulance was this year?
Mr. Valencourt or Mr. Johnson?
Go ahead, Jim.
Mr. Moderator, through you, this year the town expended $962,000 out of there, so I believe that would account for the $650 and the difference in for the ambulance. So it was most recently.
And through you, Mr. Moderator, the expectation is that we'll be buying another new ambulance in approximately 3 years?
Mr. Johnson?
Mr. Moderator, it's averaged 2 to 3 years, so 3, the chief is telling me.
3. Thanks, Chief.
And what is, again, through you, Mr. Moderator, what is the exact name of the fund?
Mr. Johnson?
The ambulance reserve receipt account.
Mr. Salvatore, do you have more questions?
I have a substitute motion that I'd like to present.
Please come on down. Mr. Damish, you second this motion? I just saw him writing it before.
Yes, I did, sir.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Salvatore, your motion's not in the proper format. If you want to come and write it, you have to talk about the full funding sources.
She has the paper available.
While we're waiting for Mr. Salvatore to draft his motion, I have a motion to take Article 28 out of order to be taken up after Article 27, which, as you know, is the first order of business on Wednesday evening. Mr. Chekarowski, who? Oh, Mr. Buckley seconded it. Okay, thank you. Any discussion on the motion to move Article 28?
Just repeat it again, I didn't hear.
Yes, sorry. So this is a motion from Mr. Chekarowski, it's seconded by Mr. Buckley, to take Article 28 out of order after Article 27, which is the first order of business on Wednesday night. Mr. Leith.
Yes, John Leith, Precinct 1, through you, Mr. Moderator. Phil, could you just explain what the reasoning behind that is so we have a better understanding of why that request was made?
Mr. Chekarowski.
Point of information, Mr. Moderator. So we had a motion made that was defective, so that's off to the side. Now we're moving on.
I'm giving him a moment, and I'm taking up a incidental motion just to kind of keep moving the business along. So that is still the motion on the floor. This is an incidental motion. Should I hold? I'm asking Tom. As I thought I said, I wanted to set this aside to give Mr. Salvatore a moment to write his motion, and I just wanted to go ahead and take care of this incidental motion. I'm not taking up a new article, it's a motion to change the order. So the main motion on the floor is still this. I'm setting this aside for a moment. If folks are okay to take this out of order, just in the instance of efficiency. Okay? So Mr. Chekarowski.
Philip Shaharofsky, Precinct 7. Through you, Mr. Moderator. The reason for making this request is that we expect there's going to be some significant questions and discussion about this article, and we felt it was good to do it earlier in the evening when people are fresh and make sure that people have a chance to really get their questions or the discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chekarowski. Any other questions or comments? Mr. Trudell.
Trudell, Precinct 4. Also, where it's a citizen's petition for the benefit of the citizens, we should try to give them a time certain as opposed to have them hanging around all night. So I rise in favor of this change.
Thank you, Mr. Trudell. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, we'll take a vote on the motion to take Article 28 out of order. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. The ayes have it. Thank you. Out of order? I don't think so. Excuse me, folks, I'm just double checking to see. All set, thank you. No, I appreciate that. Okay, so we are going to take
Mr. Moderator.
Article 29 out of order.
Mr. Moderator.
Yes.
Our Dean, Precinct 2. Just for clarification, Mr. Trudell stated to be a time certain. We cannot make a time certain if we're already voting on one article. We might, time certain might be next Wednesday night, the rate we're going right here, but it's actually after Article 27, 28 will be in, so it will not be, just for clarification, Mr. Trudell said time certain. There will not be any time certain on this article.
I agree,
It'll be
Mr.
after
Ardeen.
27.
I think he was just making
Right.
up
Just
a
for
point. The
clarification.
motion clearly stated it follows Article 27, which is the first order of business Wednesday night.
Right.
Mr. Salvatore, are you ready? We're really holding up the meeting, and I'd like to get moving forward. Thank you. Right now, you are, yes. This should have been ready. Mr. Salvatore, I hate to tell you this, so first of all, you've got an error in the amounts, and you're also, I can't read your article, your motion in writing. Any further questions on the article? Ms. Regusta, moving on.
I don't have any questions. I just have a statement to make through you, Mr. Moderator. As was previously noted by Mr. Salvatore, the Ambulance Reserve Receipt Fund currently has $1,081,000 in it. I know that we have increased our rates effective March 2017. Is that correct, Chief?
Yes, it is.
Do you have an idea of the percentage increase that would be expected over? I know I have the last 10 years balances in the Ambulance Reserve Fund where we generate the last couple of years $950,000. Do you expect that to increase 10%, 20%?
The billing company that we use estimates that we'll bring in approximately 80 to 100,000 with the new rates.
Additional?
Correct.
So we'll be at about $1 million-ish, a little over $1 million.
Just shy of that.
Okay. I would just like to note, Mr. Moderator, that much like free cash, although free cash is from different sources, the ambulance fund is funded through ambulance receipts on a regular basis. And I do think it's entirely appropriate that capital items, to the extent possible, that are dedicated for the fire department, if there are funds in the ambulance reserve fund, that capital items should be funded to the extent possible out of that account. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Regusta. Any other questions or comments? Chief Bailey, do you have any comments?
No, I do not.
Thank you, Chief. Ms. Hamilton?
Allie Hamilton, Precinct 2, and a member of FinCom currently. I just want to speak on behalf of the presentation given on FinCom the other night as just being a member watching it, and maybe our TMs in this room may not realize, but our truck was purchased in 1989. And when Chief Bailey said a fire truck is usually a typical life expectancy of 15 to 20, ours is 28 years old, and with a value of being $6,000 brought to the recycling center. So at this time, it seems that a fire truck is necessary. The funding is necessary to find it tonight, as well as the buildings we have going on in town are going to require a truck of this magnitude.
Thank you. I'm now going to take up Mr. Chief Bailey.
I do have a short presentation if you want to hear it. I mean, I can explain.
Chief Bailey, I think Mr. Salvatore, along with my leniency, took up your time for your presentation. I apologize.
Fine.
I'm actually going to bring up Mr. Salvatore's substitute motion now. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town transfer $500,000 from free cash and $750,000 from the ambulance fund to purchase and equip a new aerial ladder truck for the Walpole Fire Department. It is submitted by Mr. Salvatore and seconded by Mr. Damish. Any questions or comments on the substitute motion?
Mr. Moderator, Damish, Precinct 7. Basically, first off, I apologize for that little mishap, but what we're attempting to do is basically get a twofer here. We want to get Mr. Bailey's truck, maybe get some more money from Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson, if you saw through your materials, as you go further into Article 27, he lists a number, almost like a laundry list of things he'd like to spend on. And one that caught my eye was the DPW equipment replacement. I live on Pemberton Street, which is a very steep street. I hear the trucks whining up and down those streets as they try to get up it. And that's why I decided to jump on here. I'd love to see some money be used from the ambulance fund and the rest from free cash, and then the remainder be available in free cash towards future projects or equipment.
Thank you, Mr. Damish. Mr. Pittman.
Pittman, Precinct 1. Through you, Mr. Moderator, either through Mr. Johnson or maybe Chief, can we understand the downside of doing this proposal? Thank you.
Chief Bailey, Mr. Johnson.
Just a few comments on my end. If this article is voted upon the way it's worded, This will leave a balance of approximately $331,676 in that account. As I previously mentioned, the town rolled forward we counted about $665,000 as part of the budget. The finance director just texted me and reminded me that this would put the current operating budget for next fiscal year at risk because we may not have sufficient funds to cover it. Now, I would note that the Finance Committee and Board of Selectmen agreed with this funding source, Board of Selectmen 4-1, Finance Committee 11-3. I haven't had an opportunity to take the time to explore what the impacts of a $750,000 adjustment to the ambulance receipt account would be. I could do that, but I just need some time to work with my finance team.
Mr. Salvatore?
I'd hate to do it, but can we move this to Wednesday night, and we'll come up with a number that is appropriate? Basically, what we have here, the ambulance fund is a restricted fund. It's like we have a gift certificate to buy police stuff. And if we could
Excuse me, Mr. Salvatore, are you still making comments on your motion to move it to another night, or are you making comments on the article?
Yes, it's as to another night. And so if we can come up with a number that works to use some of that certificate for these funds, and then that will free up more free cash for other things that we might want to do. And that's what perhaps we can come up with after more further review.
So, Mr. Salvatore, you just want to postpone it till Wednesday night, no specific...
Yeah, table it until Wednesday. And
You want to lay this on the table, that's a different motion.
I'm sorry, lay it on the table too.
You want to lay the article on the table, the motion. The motion, you want to lay the motion on the table. That requires a 2/3 vote, okay? So...
Point of order, Mr.
Excuse me, it is not debatable,
Point of
Mr. Snuff? Yes.
That motion needs to be seconded.
Yes, it does, thank you.
Thank you, I would have...
Do I have a second on that? To lay the article, the motion on the table? Mr. Damish? So we have a second. So to lay an article on the table is not debatable. It requires a 2/3 vote. So all those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. It is not a 2/3 vote. Mr. Snuffer.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. What I'm sure I and this austere body is looking for in this particular article is some coherency. What we have is an identified need, and for those who I hear have been arguing that this did not appear on the capital budget, I can assure you that we have documentation that shows unequivocally that this has been on for the last 6 years. That happens to be the truth. With respect to the amount from free cash, if you start dipping into a variety of funds that are not intended for things other than fire personnel and ambulance services, including the replacement of an ambulance, you're running into a very, very deep swamp. The other aspect is relative to how much will it go up, as Ms. Ragosta said. Well, the reality here is the state is considering changing the rules and making it go down. So be very cautious. I would suggest that we vote this and vote it through and get it done.
Thank you, Mr. Snuffer. Mr. Abbott.
Bill Abbott, Precinct 6. Through you, Mr. Moderator, I guess I'm puzzled as to, we have something labeled the ambulance fund, and now we're going to be able, can we use it for fire trucks, and could we use it for school books? I mean, how far does the ambulance fund, is there any restriction on what it can be used for?
Town council?
Maybe that's to council.
We actually checked on this about a month or so ago, and council confirmed it could be used if town meeting decides to use it in this manner.
Through you, Mr. Moderator, when you say this manner, is it limited to ambulance and fire, or is it could go anywhere?
Mr. Johnson?
If the body decides to appropriate the funds, it could go really anywhere. It's not restricted.
Okay, so it's the fact that we call it the ambulance fund.
Historically, when we have a precedent of only using it through you on the ambulance or ambulance-related items.
And I guess that was the reason I was bringing this up, is that that was my understanding, and I think probably the understanding of everybody in this body, that the ambulance fund, we collected fees to replace the ambulance, and anything that we can say is related to the ambulance. And here we seem to be going one step, at least for me, one step too far. Before we know it, it really should just be called Fund A and could be used anywhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Abbott. Mr. O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Jim O'Neill, Precinct 8. And in the words of the immortal Joe Deneen, move the question.
You do know that it's a substitute motion that's being moved, right?
Second. Substitute motion failed on a 2/3 vote.
No, that was to lay it on the table.
I withdraw the motion to move.
Thank you. Mr. O'Neill withdraws the motion to move the question. So just as a quick reminder, we are on the substitute motion, $500,000 from free cash, $750,000 from the ambulance fund. Mr. O'Leary.
John O'Leary, RTM Precinct 3. Just to go along with what Mr. Abbott said, the ambulance fund obviously is there for the benefit of the fire department. What else is more beneficial to the fire department than the new truck they're looking for? It makes perfect sense to me to be taking money from the ambulance fund to help fund the fire department. What else would you want to use the ambulance fund for? That's more appropriate. Thank you.
Mr. Stas.
Didn't want to attempt that?
Sorry, no, I'm not going to. Stakavakis.
Through you, Mr. Moderator, and Jim, chime in if I'm misspeaking, but traditionally, we've used this fund for the fire department, yes, to purchase ambulances, but also, as you know, every spring we vote to move monies out of it to help the chief with his budget. You know, like the police department, they're having issues with OT and stuff like that and trying to make ends meet there. So and again, stop me if I'm misspeaking, but, you know, it sounds like a big number, and sure, I'd love to use it strictly for the fire department and stuff like that. But there has been talk, even though we have raised the rates, that those could change. And if we take $750,000 out of it, leave only about $250,000 in there. Funding, last spring we did $665. So if the chief needs that $665 again for the budget, we only have $250. Well, then we're going to have another discussion. Where do we get the $400 from? So, I was definitely pro for raising rates and getting more money into that budget so the chief would have, a better time trying to staff his department. So, although I'm not, I think it's all agreed, we need a truck. We absolutely need a truck. So, because that thing's older than heck. So, where we're getting the funding from, I think, is where we're having some difficulties in the discussion. I would say just leave it as is, because if we really deplenish the ambulance fund or whatever we're calling it, it could be detrimental in the spring. That's all.
Thank you. Mr. Valencourt.
Through you, Mr. Moderator. So I just ran some quick numbers so we can kind of frame the conversation. There's almost $1.1 million in the fund today. Over the next 3 years, we expect to take in $900,000, and then we're going to use $650 as we normally would. So each year over the next 3, we're going to net an additional $250,000. So over 3 years, we'll generate $750, really enough to pay for the fire truck that we're suggesting now, without ever touching the balance of the $1.1 million. And the next fire truck isn't for 3 more years, most likely, and that's $300,000. So bottom line is, there's enough money, sufficiently based upon quick math here, and still leave $600,000 or $700,000 in the fund 4 years out. Anyone can check the numbers, but just those look to be the numbers.
Thank you, Mr. Valencourt. Ms. Curran.
Cheryl Karen, Precinct 7, moves the question.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We're moving the question. I apologize. Voting to move the substitute motion. Yes, thank you. We are moving the question to make the substitute motion the main motion. My apologies for the lack of clarity. Thank you for those who helped out there. So all those in favor, this requires a 2/3 vote. All those in favor of making this we're moving the question first. So ending debate and moving the question to make this the main motion. We're not voting on it, the amendment yet, okay? So all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Okay, it is a vote. So all those in favor of making the substitute motion the main motion, which requires a simple majority vote, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
It is a vote. The noes have it. So now we're back to debate on the main motion. The substitute motion did not pass, for those of you that have questions. Mr. Flowers.
Andrew Flowers, Precinct 4, move the question.
Who seconded that? Susan Lawson, she's nice and close. Okay, that requires a 2/3 majority to move the question. Yes, Mr. Damish. Excuse me? Once the question's been moved, there's no debate. Which the substitute motion failed, and now Mr. Flowers has moved the main motion now.
So just to be sure, Mr. Moderator, going forward, we can move articles without debating it, is what you're saying.
I believe the article was debated prior to the substitute motion being spoken on. I have 3 speakers before the substitute motion was brought forward. And Mr. Flowers was at the microphone, and he is able to move the question. Thank you. All those in favor of moving the question, which is the main motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. It is a vote. Question is moved. All those in favor of Article 4, which requires a simple majority vote, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. It is a vote. Moving right along. Article 5, the appropriation for dredging of Memorial Pond. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town transfer $1 million from free cash for the purpose of dredging Memorial Pond. Mr. Valencourt, Finance Committee vote.
So Article 5, Finance Committee vote, it was a failed vote, 6-7-1 favorable action.
Unfavorable, 671. Thank you, Mr. Valencourt.
No, that's where.
Mr. Gallivan, Board of Selectmen.
Selectmen voted favorable action, 5-0-0.
Mr. Forsberg.
Mr. Moderator, Capital Budget Committee voted favorable action 7-0-0.
Thank you, Mr. Forsberg. So I just want to point out, folks, that the main motion is the Finance Committee motion, which was unfavorable 671. Okay, so that's the motion that we are taking up right now, even though Board of Selectmen and Capital Budget voted favorable. Okay, Mr. Trudell.
Trudell, Precinct 4, just for clarification, where the motion was favorable action that failed, is a unfavorable action the correct motion at this point?
We have a negative main motion.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Mr. Snuffer.
They voted. That was the motion. That was the only motion that was offered. They didn't offer a substitute.
Through you, Mr. Moderator, to the years of town council. I believe if you follow the
motion appropriately. You will have a motion for favorable action that failed 671, I believe. It is still before this body as an arguable motion for favorable action.
It is, so Mr. Snuffer, it is a negative main motion. To your point, you can take up the negative main motion, or there can be a substitute article, motion or amendment.
I'm not sure that there's the need for the substitute.
Okay.
And that's what I'd like to question.
Town council?
Mr. Moderator, through you, the present motion is for negative action.
Yes.
That's the motion. Unfavorable action.
Then it would be, based on that, appropriate for a substitute motion for favorable action. And I agree with that. Thank you.
You're welcome. We do have a presentation from the Vice Chair of the Ponds Committee, Mr. Snuffer.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Snuffer, Precinct 6, Co-Chairman of the Walpole Ponds. Fellow RTM members and citizens of Walpole, on behalf of the Walpole Ponds Committee, we would like to thank this body for your past and present support of our town ponds and the skating lodge at Turner's. Article 5 that is before you calls for the dredging of Memorial Pond and the potential rebirth of Memorial Park. We are at this dredge phase of this project due to a couple of facts. The first fact being that this body in 2013 voted favorably for the funding of $15,300 to do a dredge feasibility study. The findings of this study revealed the Memorial Pond had no hazardous materials and could be dredged. This was the best case scenario for Memorial Pond. With those findings, the second phase of this project was to obtain an engineering plan and to start the permitting process. This body again in 2015 voted favorably the sum of $44,100 to move forward. Ladies and gentlemen, the historical significance of Memorial Pond is important. In 1924, Mr. Robert Nolan designed Memorial Park for the bicentennial celebration of Walpole, incorporated in 1724. Mr. Nolan also designed Memorial Park Bridge. The Memorial Park Bridge was dedicated in 1924 on the 200th anniversary of the town incorporation in honor of the Revolutionary soldiers, sailors, and nurses of the town of Walpole. In just 7 years, bringing us to 2024, Walpole will be celebrating its tricentennial. The location of Memorial Pond is also significant in location, being just yards from the town hall, the town pool, Joe Morgan Field, the new library, Blackburn Hall, the old town hall, in the center of town. The Walpole Ponds Committee respectfully asks this body once again for your support with a yes vote on Article 5 to dredge Memorial Pond and restore this valuable historical resource back to life. A no vote, and this pond will unfortunately deteriorate into a swamp environment, and future costs to dredge will be escalated. Ultimately, if we do nothing, Memorial Pond will be on the point of restoration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Snuffer.
Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Johnson?
Just as Mr. Snuffer is speaking, we ran the PowerPoint just to move things along. Just what you'll see here on the last two slides is the projected estimated budget. We received this estimated budget, again, based upon what our consultants has provided with us. Our consultant ESS group, Carl, is here this evening. He can speak to some technical questions you may have. But we're estimating it to be just around $1 million. Some have asked, well, what if it comes in over when you bid out the construction work? Learning from some experiences we've had with the police and fire station, we will bid in, we'll include ad alternates as part of that bid. So if the bid comes in over, just like we did with the senior center, we'll cut out some of those or cut where we need to. Next slide, Mike. And just as far as a projected time frame on this, we're looking for a construction in this winter. The water is much more controllable when it's frozen and cold. and we're looking to have the whole job completed in July at the latest, just to finish everything up and restore the wetlands. And I know the chairman of the Conservation Commission's here if you have any specific questions related to the Conservation Commission. Thank you.
We now have a substitute motion submitted by Mr. Snuffer and seconded by Ms. Beatty to move favorable action on the article as printed in the warrant. Any further discussions on the substitute motion to move favorable action on the article as written in the warrant? Seeing none, this requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. It is a vote. If there are any of those who wish to speak on the favorable motion for Article 5, that is now the main motion.
Point of information through you, Mr. Moderator. Can we get the budget back up on the screen? We really haven't seen that before.
The one from the presentation that was just up there a little bit ago?
Mr. Moderator, I don't think I couldn't hear. I could only hear you through here. Mike, will you pull up the budget, the last, second to last slide on that presentation?
Thank you.
Did you have a question, or did you just want to study it? Because if there are no other questions, I'm going to call for a vote. Mr. Pia. Did I get it right that time?
No, just call me Smitty. For you, Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Pia.
It's okay. I don't care.
I'll work on it. I'll practice, I promise.
What happens with the silt when the pond is dredged? I'm sorry.
Mr. Moderator, through you.
Mr. Johnson.
That is going to be removed. There's our plan to hopefully reuse that on some of the space that is that's going to be created with the result of the Route 1A fields design there. One of the alternates is going to be to clear about 2 to 4 acres there so they could simply dump it. That will allow us not to have to pay for the trucking off-site, because we've checked with some of the local contractors, the bigger ones you may expect. There's not much interest there. They don't have any interest. We've also explored the possibility of storing it down at the compost site on Robbins Road. It would take up the entire compost site, so that's not feasible. If we clear the land at Route 1A, we can reuse it in the future, a few years down the road.
And what would you, any idea, Mr. Moderator, for you, Mr. Moderator, any idea what the value of the silt is?
Mr. Johnson.
Mr. Moderator, through you. Again, that will be built into the bid. I'm optimistic that we'll actually receive a credit for it as part of that $1 million, because I'm told through our consultant that it is nutrient rich. You can grow grass on it, and it has value to people. So that's my hope.
So is it fair to say that the $1 million that's being budgeted to do the dredging will actually be less than $1 million when you factor in the credit that we would receive from the silt?
Mr. Johnson.
Mr. Moderator, through you. You can barely see it at the bottom there. It's cut off a little bit, but it says 920. The expected cost of the project, 920 to $1.280 million. I'm hoping it comes in on the low range. That's why I'm planning for those ad alternates there. So if there is funds remaining in that, again, it will likely be reappropriated at a future town meeting.
Mr. Moderator, I wasn't questioning the cost. What I'm saying is the silt has value. So I think it's significant to point out that if the cost is $1 million to do the dredging, the net cost would be something less than that, because the silt that would be taken from the pond through the dredging process has a value.
Thank you. My apologies. Is Mr. Wiley still here? Mr. Wiley, Ms. Regusta, Mr. Wiley from the Conservation Commission had comments, and I just found my note in front of me.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The Conservation Commission at the September 13th meeting voted 5-0-0 to approve the order of conditions for dredging of Memorial Pond. In addition to the obvious beautification that this project provides, it'll also improve the resource area and improve water quality with the deep water area and the wetland shelf. This benefits fish and aquatic plants, and with diversified wetland species. It also would remove some invasive plants such as water chestnuts and other nuisance vegetation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wiley. Ms. Regosta?
Ann Regosta, Precinct 3. My comment and a couple of questions is, much like the $9 million Fields project, this project has completely bypassed the capital budget planning process. And my question is, and I should know the answer, my assumption is, and I'm pretty certain that we do have a requirement to put capital items on the capital budget plan before we decide to move forward with them so that they can be debated against other capital, and I know we've sort of talked about this before, but through you, Mr. Moderator, why do we continually bypass the capital budget planning process for such large and, I won't use the word extravagant, but very, very, very expensive projects? And I find that very concerning that this is a pattern and a practice of our fiscal and budgetary policy. Through you, Mr. Moderator, is this the norm that we do it this way?
Mr. Johnson?
Mr. Moderator, through you. Actually, in fact, in 2012, capital budget voted favorably to fund $20,000 for the study for feasibility and engineering to develop a conceptual plan. So that was in 2012. And in 2016, and actually town meeting voted on that too. In 2016, capital budget, just a year ago, voted $80,000 to fund and design the permitting of this specific project. So it has been on the plan. Capital budget has met and discussed this particular project multiple years, and actually, in fact, this year they met, they discussed it, they voted favorably to fund the $1 million. So it has been on the capital, and capital has reviewed it.
I'm sorry? Through you, Mr. Moderator.
My apologies.
I think there's a big difference between a $20,000 and an $80,000 item put on the capital budget plan as opposed to the $1 million cost of the project. My understanding that the capital budget plan should be the cost and description of the project or the capital item. Through you, Mr. Moderator, I'm looking for an answer.
Mr. Johnson?
Mr. Moderator, through you. I'm actually pulling up my presentation from 2016. If you give me a second, I believe the range that I provided to this body was $750,000 to $1.25 million that we provided in a presentation to this body a year ago.
Through you, Mr. Moderator, I understand that, a town meeting that's discussed, but again, and this will be my last comment on it, so I don't belabor the point, although I probably feel like I'm wearing out my welcome already. I would like to stress that we have a capital budget plan which is distinctly different from town meeting. And the capital budget plan is the published plan on the town hall website for the taxpayers to see what capital projects are being considered. I think there is a distinct difference, again, between thinking about it and discussing it at meetings and actually putting it on paper in the plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Augusta. Mr. Valencourt, and then I'll come to you, Mr. Spillane.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Moderator. My two questions. The disposal cost for the material I see up there on the budget, it's any number of numbers, but it could be somewhere between $700,000 and $1 million. Explain to me the difference between that and the silt that we're going to obtain and perhaps dump at the proposed site for the new athletic fields, as was mentioned and indicated as a goal, in the FinCom meetings. To the town administrator, please.
Mr. Johnson?
Mr. Moderator, through you, I'm not an expert in nutrient-rich soil. We actually asked Carl to stay here tonight. I know he's smiling at me. Maybe he could address some of the specific questions. I know he was at the Conservation public hearing and the Finance Committee the evening they discussed this. So do you mind if I...
Absolutely not. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm not an expert in nutrient-rich soil per se. I'm a certified lake manager, and I've done a lot of these dredge projects. Generally, we don't show the credits for beneficial reuse of the material. We don't like to plan that you'll get paid back. It's like planning on a rebate. So in this spreadsheet, it really just shows the true costs, any recovery you get from reuse or beneficial kickback from not having to buy soil for the development of the ball field property isn't in that spreadsheet. Thank you.
Okay, so just to follow up and have another question. So the disposal is mostly the cost of the trucking, obviously to excavate the material and then...
Trucking, yes.
Okay. And we were told that there may be somewhere about 1,200 truck trips to spend the $1 million over a course of 4 to 6 weeks going down Route 1A. So the other question, what % of the pond is being dredged? At FinCom, I think there were estimates 70%, 75%. People in this room may think the whole thing's getting dredged, but
yeah,
that's not what's happening. At least that's
it's
not
about
what we were told.
70% of the material is being dredged, which is about half of the volume, half of the area of the pond. So
I'm sorry. So you said half the pond is being dredged.
70% of the material, but yes, half the pond.
Thank you.
Yeah, we looked at through you, Mr. Moderator. We looked at looking at dredging the entire pond, the volume of material, and the added costs. This alternative was found to be a better value when we did our alternatives analysis.
Thank you. Mr. Spillane?
Spillane, Precinct 6, and also the Animal Control Officer. I just want to say that if we do dredge this thing out, which I think we really should, you could say goodbye to a lot of your beautiful geese because they can't feed in deep water. As it is now, it's like a picnic between there and the fields at Town Hall. That would end. You'd still have some, but nothing like we have today.
Thank you, Mr. Spillane.
There'd be less geese.
Mr. Southwood?
Well, that's a plus. Kenneth Southwood, Precinct 5. Through you, Mr. Moderator. I'd just like to point out Mr. Snuffer's diligence on this project and bringing up the fact that the design and the dedication was in 1924. We're 7 years away from that. I don't think there's anything else we can spend $1 million on and get, I mean, it's not the same size of the pond, but get, say, 50 to a 75-year return on our money. On $1 million, there's nothing in this town we're going to spend it on. This project is a guaranteed return for, I'll even lower the number to 40 years, that you're going to have family, fishing, and economics back in the heart of Walpole for what it was designed for. This is a rejuvenation of the Walpole Center, and again, you're not going to get a return on anything else in this town for $1 million like you're going to get on Memorial Pond. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Southwood. Any other questions or comments? Saying none, we will now vote on the article, the substitute motion, which is now the main motion for favorable action to transfer $1 million from free cash for the purpose of dredging Memorial Pond. This requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
The ayes have it. It is a vote. Article 6, appropriation to the stabilization fund. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town vote to transfer from free cash the sum of $200,000 for the purpose of supplementing the stabilization fund as authorized by Chapter 40, Section 5B of the Massachusetts General Laws. I'll point out that the current balance that noted in your packet is $2,260,710. Any questions or comments? Excuse me, Mr. Valencourt, Finance Committee vote.
Finance Committee voted favorable action 751.
Thank you, Mr. Valencourt. Mr. Gallivan, Board of Selectmen.
Selectmen voted favorable action 500.
Thank you, Mr. Gallivan. Mr. Hamilton.
Yes, Hamilton, Precinct 5. Through you to the Finance Committee, is this an appropriate amount to put in the stabilization fund?
Mr. Valencourt.
Through you, Mr. Moderator, yes, it's certainly a subjective decision on what's appropriate, but some people wanted more, so, it's subjective. There's no ironclad formula to be used.
So it is sufficient?
Yes.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, this requires a simple majority vote. Excuse me. I am okay, thank you. There being none, this motion requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? It is unanimous vote. Article 7, appropriation to the OPEB fund. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town vote to transfer from free cash the sum of $100,000 for the purpose of supplementing the fund known as the Other Post-Employment Benefits Liability Trust Fund, OPEB, as authorized by Chapter 32B, Section 20 of the Mass General Laws. Mr. Valencourt, Finance Committee.
Finance Committee voted favorable action 13-2.
Thank you, Mr. Valencourt. Mr. Gallivan, Board of Selectmen.
Selectmen voted favorable action 500.
Thank you, Mr. Gallivan. Mr. Hamilton.
Hamilton, Precinct 5. My question is that a sufficient transfer for the fund?
Mr. Valencourt.
Through you, Mr. Moderator. This is subject to much discussion and debate today. We do have a report from the actuary that estimates that the town's liability is $64 million. That report is 2 years old. We're anticipating the new report, a draft of the new report within the next couple of weeks. I think most people think the liability could climb higher. The current balance is, which I don't have that off the top of my head. I defer to Jim to just to mention the balance in OPEB currently.
Actually, John, it's in the front of your book. I'm just going to read from your letter.
Thank you.
The current balance is $2,258,162.
Right, so 2.2. So many, the actuaries suggest this should be funded at $4 million a year. So certainly 100,000 is a lot less than 4 million.
But in the Finance Committee's thinking today, that is sufficient.
Mr. Valencourt.
It passed, through you, Mr. Moderator, it passed favorable action.
Thank you.
Mr. Leith.
John Leith, Precinct 1. I'm one of the two individuals in the FinCom who voted against this. But the reason I voted against it is because of serious reservations I have that $100,000 is woefully inadequate. So it wasn't a vote against the idea of funding OPEB. It was rather a vote to make the statement that we need to do a lot better. And frankly, I think that we need to use some free cash to bump this thing up. Just one other comment. Mr. Valencourt mentioned that the projected ideal contribution would be $4 million per year. That actually is a number that It's somewhat less because you have to include contributions that are being made right now. So I believe the figure is closer to, I don't know the exact figure, but it's about $2 million. But my personal feeling is we have to figure out a way to get more money into this fund, because if we don't do that, we are kicking a obligation down the road to our, well, it might even be within 10 or 15 years, but certainly to our children, and that's not a legacy we should be leaving for the next generation.
Mr. Pila.
Terrific, thank you very much.
She gets all the credit.
Oh, all right. Thank you, I appreciate that. To you, Mr. Moderator, 100,000, we have a $64 million obligation. It's suggested that we should be spending $4 million a year to bring that number down.
Just point of information, Mr. Leith reminded us, that's a gross number, including current payments. So it's actually closer to $2 million is what's recommended.
Is there, for you, Mr. Moderator, is there a plan to bring that liability down to where it should be, zero?
Mr. Valencourt or Mr. Johnson?
Right, through you, Mr. Moderator, Finance has not seen such a plan or taken part in such a discussion to do that to date, to my knowledge.
To you, Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Johnson? Sorry.
Just to follow up to John, he is correct. Right now, we are waiting for our actuarial study to come back. We expect it to be in the next few weeks, and then I've suggested that we have a joint meeting between the school committee, finance committee, board of selectmen, with the auditor who actually conducted that actuarial study, and to begin to identify other funding sources. Most recently, back 2-3 years ago, Walpole did not appropriate any funds as part of our regular budgeting process. I believe this past town meeting was the third time we appropriated $300,000 as part of our regular budgeting process. The bonding company indicated they're pleased to see that we're making a modest dent in it. But long term, we would need to budget a significant amount of money each year to do this. And we're talking 10 or 15 years. The town of Wellesley, maybe 5 to 7 years ago, passed an override just to fund their actuarial audit. I'm not proposing that at this time. It's also not required as part of the bond rating companies, and the auditors do not require it. It's a suggested practice. Would I like to see more? Yes, but it would come at the sacrifice of other programs and ideas that are being floated out there.
To you, Mr. Moderator, what is the interest rate that this is increasing annually?
Mr. Johnson?
I would defer to Marilyn on this. She's telling me 4%.
So we're not even keeping up with the interest rate. So the principal keeps on increasing.
Well, point of information, is your question the 2.2 million that we have on hand or the liability of 64 million?
I'm looking at the 64 million that's going up 4% a year, and we're only putting in $100,000.
Yeah, point of information, I don't know if we have an actuarial expert, but the 64 million is not driven really just by interest. There's a lot of other factors in there, and I'm not sure to what degree interest is the primary factor. It's the aging population and the required benefits that would be paid. So I don't think it's correct to just apply the 4%, but someone smarter than me may have more information on this.
Final comment, Mr. Moderator, for you. I would hope that the FinCom, Board of Selectmen, take this issue seriously and do something to start a dialogue, because this is unacceptable. This is going to come back to haunt this town, because that number is only going to keep on going up.
Thank you, Mr. Pila. Mr. Gallivan?
Thanks. I just wanted to remind people, and we did talk about this a few years ago, that until about 8 years ago, OPEB was a pay-as-you-go process, not only for all the towns in Massachusetts, but for all the state agencies. So you got your bill for the year for OPEB, and you paid it. The Government Accounting Standards Board has sort of regulated that we should be going toward identifying what the liability is and paying toward it. So if you think of it, we're sort of in a transition between straight payment for what you owed that year, moving to a fully funded liability. And I think the state, our auditors, the state bond rating agencies realize that, with the exception of like a Wellesley that went and did an override, most towns are in fact moving in that process. And if you want to be a little bit scared, you could go take a look at the MBTA as an example, who's nowhere on this process right now. They have a lot of other problems. So, you know, the towns are trying to move forward, the state's trying to move forward, and everybody's struggling with it a little bit, especially some of the big state agencies. But we're sort of mid-transition, so I agree with what Mr. Pilar said. It is a good topic to bring up between the different major boards and evaluate the plan and look, you know, I think we've done good putting money in the base budget of $300,000 and then adding extra monies. But it's not like we're at the end of the line, we're working toward fully funding, so.
Thank you, Mr. Caliban. Mr. Flowers.
Through you, Mr. Moderator, Andrew Flowers, Precinct 4 RTM and Finance Committee member. I wish I hadn't have given my time to Mark because he stole one of my good points about the GASB changes coming down the line. So I just want to make 3 quick points because I think there's going to be lots of both alarmist talk about OPEB in the next few years, but also not alarmist enough talk about OPEB, and I'm kind of somewhere in the middle. So the first point I want to reiterate is that it's really great. Town Administrator Johnson is going to organize the actuarial study when it's published to coincide with a meeting with these different committees. We should study this further. It's something that I hope town meeting pays attention to over the next few years. So that study process going forward is great. I voted for favorable action on this article for the time being, but it's probably likely we're going to be investing more in OPEB in the future. But on that point, number 2, you're going to hear, as Mark said, a lot of changes coming from the Government Accounting Standards Board, GASB, which I'm not going to waste too much time, but what Mark said basically. There's going to be changes here. So this whole argument that, well, it can't ever be funded, it's optional, that was true up till now, and that may change in the future. So that's an argument for kind of taking this more seriously and funding it at a higher rate. But on the other side of this, and this is a point I think Jim Johnson just made, is that the bond rating agencies aren't like surprised by this. I mean, they do their homework. So in terms of this GASB change in the next few years, our ability to borrow, I don't think we should be too alarmist and say that this is going to threaten the town's bond rating. They're already aware of all these liabilities, so keep that in mind. And then the final thing I'll add, my third and final point, is when you consider OPEB in the future, you need to tie it to these debates we're having about free cash. Because if you believe it's fiscally irresponsible, if you believe that we don't give enough towards OPEB, one of the ways we budget and top off the OPEB account even further is through free cash. So just keep that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Flowers. Mr. Hasenjager.
Great. The 2 speakers actually covered all my points. It's nice to have another economist in the room, Andrew. The point I would add to that is as follows. We're not floating alone in the ocean. All the other communities, the MBTA, there's got to be global fixes coming down the road. There's going to be overlays that are going to help resolve the OPEB shortages. There's no reason to be panicking now. We're not out of line. The bellwether town meeting members should use is the bond rating. Our bond rating is so good, that means we really aren't in trouble. And the fixes are going to be global. What we should do when the congressmen and our reps come in here and give us their little flowery talks, we should point out to them that we're sending too much money to Beacon Hill and Washington, D.C., and we don't get enough back, and they're the ones that cause these stresses to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hasenjager. Can we vote on this first, Mr. Deneen? Thank you. Then I'll take your motion. Any further questions or comments on Article 7? There being none, this requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed? It is a vote, unanimous. We have a motion to adjourn from Mr. Deneen. Do I have a second? Pick one. Susan, your hand up again. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed? It is a unanimous vote. We'll see you Wednesday night.